If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. Dawn crept across the snow-laden peaks of the Olympic Mountains like a reluctant ghost, casting pale fingers of light through the towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks that surrounded Marcus Whitmore's isolated ranger cabin. The evergreen branches groaned and creaked under their burden of fresh snow, the sound eerily reminiscent of old bones settling in the mountain wind. Marcus stepped onto his porch, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air as he cradled a steaming mug of coffee between his weathered hands. At 34, Marcus bore the face of a man who had seen too much. 3 parallel scars crossed his left cheek, souvenirs from a Chinese bayonet at Chosin Reservoir, where he'd watched good men die in temperatures that made this Washington winter feel like spring. But it wasn't the Korean War that had driven him to seek solitude 20 miles from the nearest human soul. It was the memory of Margaret's final breath, the way tuberculosis had stolen the light from her eyes 2 years ago, leaving him with nothing but a wedding ring on a chain around his neck and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. He touched the ring now, feeling its familiar weight against his chest. The wedding photo on his mantle showed a different man, one who still believed in happiness, whose hands didn't shake when he was alone with his thoughts. That man had died with Margaret, leaving behind this hollow shell who preferred the company of wilderness to the pitying looks and well-meaning condolences of townspeople. Rex, his German shepherd, emerged from inside the cabin and immediately began sniffing the air with unusual intensity. The dog's hackles rose, and he pressed close to Marcus's leg, whimpering softly. Rex had been with him since Margaret's funeral, a bond forged in mutual grief and survival. The dog understood loss in a way that humans pretended to, but never truly grasped. "What is it, boy?" Marcus murmured, running his fingers through Rex's thick fur. The dog had never been skittish. Even during their patrols through the most remote sections of the forest, Rex had maintained the confident bearing of a natural protector. The forest stretched endlessly below them, a green cathedral of silence, broken only by the distant call of a winter bird. Marcus knew every trail, every stream, every animal path within 50 square miles. This was his domain, his sanctuary from a world that had taken everything he'd ever loved. The radio inside, his cabin crackled with static. Atmospheric disturbances from an approaching storm had cut communication for 3 days, but he didn't mind. He preferred the isolation. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, creating a pristine white carpet that should have revealed every track, every sign of movement. But as Marcus scanned the tree line, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. Usually, dawn brought a symphony of small sounds, squirrels chattering, birds calling, the rustle of unseen creatures going about their daily survival. Today there was nothing. A murder of crows suddenly erupted from the canopy about 100 yards down the slope, their harsh cawing echoing unnaturally in the thin mountain air. Rex's whimpering intensified, and the dog actually tried to pull Marcus back toward the cabin door. Marcus had never seen his companion display such obvious fear. The temperature was dropping faster than his morning weather readings had predicted. His thermometer, hanging from a nail beside the door, read 15 degrees below the forecast. An unnatural silence settled over the forest, as even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that hadn't yet revealed itself. Marcus finished his coffee and went back inside to check his equipment. His rifle was clean and loaded, his emergency supplies well stocked. He'd survived Chosin Reservoir, had endured watching Margaret waste away in a hospital bed, had buried the only woman he'd ever loved. He believed nothing could break him now. He was wrong. Rex refused to take their usual morning patrol route. Instead of heading down toward the creek where they normally checked for poacher signs, the dog planted his feet and pulled insistently. Toward the cabin, his brown eyes wide, with an emotion Marcus had never seen before. Not just fear, but something approaching terror. "Come on, Rex, we've got work to do." Marcus tugged gently on the leash, but the dog began whimpering, then howling, a mournful sound that seemed to emerge from some primal place deep in his canine soul. It was a sound Marcus had never heard from him before, and it sent ice through his veins that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Against his better judgment, Marcus followed his normal routine. He'd been a ranger for 3 years, and routine was what kept a man sane in the wilderness. But as they approached the small clearing where he usually began his morning circuit, Rex suddenly went rigid, his hackles standing up like a porcupine's. The quills. That's when Marcus saw them. 3 deer carcasses lay arranged in a perfect triangle in the center of the clearing. Their throats had been torn out with surgical precision, the wounds too clean for any predator Marcus knew. The blood was fresh but already frozen, creating crimson ice crystals that glittered obscenely in the pale morning sunlight. Each deer was an adult doe, probably weighing over 200 pounds, yet they'd been positioned with care, as if by someone or something with both the strength to move them and the intelligence to arrange them purposefully. But it was the tracks that made Marcus's blood run cold. Massive paw prints circled the gruesome scene, far too large for any wolf that had ever roamed the Olympic Peninsula. Each print was the size of a dinner plate, with claw marks extending 6 inches beyond the pad impressions. The depth of the track suggested something weighing at least 300 pounds, but the stride length was wrong. Too long for a bear, too purposeful for any known quadruped. Marcus pulled out his compass to record the exact location, but the needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. It was as if something was interfering with the very magnetic field of the earth. His hands, already unsteady from old trauma, began to shake violently. A nauseating stench hung in the air. Wet fur mixed with the cloying sweetness of decay, and something else, something that reminded him of the worst moments in Korea when the Chinese had overrun their position and left the dead to freeze. His eyes watered, and he had to breathe through his mouth to keep from retching. The forest had gone completely silent. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no sound at all, except Rex's continued whimpering and the thundering of Marcus's own heartbeat. It was as if every living thing for miles around had either fled or was holding its breath in terror. Deep claw marks gouged the bark of the surrounding trees, too high for any known predator to reach. Some were 8 feet off the ground, carved into the tough Douglas fir bark as easily as if it were soft pine. Whatever had made them possessed not only incredible strength, but also the ability to rear up on its hind legs to an impossible height. As Marcus knelt to examine the tracks more closely, Rex began barking frantically, backing away from the tree line. Following the dog's gaze, Marcus caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows between the trees, something large and dark that seemed to flow rather than walk, disappearing before he could focus on it. That's when he heard it. A sound, like breaking branches, but too rhythmic, too purposeful. Something large was moving through the dense underbrush, and it was keeping pace with them as they retreated toward the cabin. Every time Marcus stopped to listen, the sound stopped too. When he resumed walking, they resumed as well. Rex was now pulling so hard on his leash that Marcus had to half run to keep up. The dog's terror was infectious, awakening the combat. Instincts that had kept Marcus alive in Korea. Something was hunting them. Something that had the intelligence to stalk its prey and the patience to wait for the right moment to strike. As they reached the relative safety of the cabin, Marcus turned for one last look at the forest. For just a moment, he thought he saw a pair of yellow eyes, reflecting the pale morning light from the shadows between the trees, positioned at least 8 feet off the ground. But when he blinked, they were gone. The radio continued to crackle with static, cutting him off from the outside world. He was 20 miles from the nearest human being, alone, except for Rex, and something was out there in the forest. Something that arranged deer carcasses in geometric patterns and left tracks that belonged to no known animal. As he bolted the cabin door behind them, Marcus wondered if he'd finally found something that could break him after all. Dusk came early in the mountains, shadows pooling between the trees like spilled ink. Marcus had spent the day reinforcing his cabin, checking and rechecking his rifle, and trying to raise someone, anyone, on the radio. The static never broke, as if the entire world beyond his small clearing had simply ceased to exist. Rex had refused to eat, spending the day pressed against Marcus's leg, trembling. Every few minutes the dog would look toward the door and whimper, as if sensing something approaching that remained beyond human perception. Marcus was cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time when Rex suddenly went rigid, staring at the front window with such intensity that the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stood up. Then he heard it, footsteps in the snow outside, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. He grabbed his flashlight and peered through the window, sweeping the beam across the tree line. That's when he saw them, yellow eyes reflecting his light, positioned impossibly high off the ground, 8 feet at least, maybe more. The eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, just watched him with an intelligence that was utterly alien, yet somehow familiar. The creature moved with impossible silence through brush that should have announced every step. Marcus tracked its movement around the cabin by those unblinking yellow eyes, but he never heard so much as a twig snap under its weight. Rex was no longer trembling. He had gone completely rigid with terror, his muscles locked as if paralyzed. By some primal fear that transcended normal animal instinct, then came the voice. Marcus, soft, loving, heartbreakingly familiar. Marcus, darling, come to me. Margaret's voice, sweet and gentle, carrying the same note of affection she'd used when calling him in for dinner during their brief, happy marriage. The voice that had whispered, I love you, with her final breath. Marcus's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the flashlight. No, he whispered. No, you're dead. I buried you. I've been waiting for you, Marcus. Out here in the cold, waiting so long. Come to me, darling. Come outside. Through the window, he could see the silhouette now, a nightmare fusion of human and beast. The creature stood upright on powerful hind legs, its body towering at least 8 feet tall. Its head was that of a massive wolf, but the torso was humanoid, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Arms hung at its sides, ending in hands that were too large, too clawed to be human, yet too articulated to be purely animal. I know you're lonely, Marcus. I know you miss me. Just step outside, and we can be together forever. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle accent that had made Margaret's speech so distinctive. But it was coming from a muzzle full of teeth that gleamed white in the flashlight beam, each one the size of a man's thumb. Marcus raised his rifle, sighting through the window. The creature watched him with what could only be described as amusement, its breathing creating visible clouds of steam in the cold air. Each exhalation carried that putrid stench of death and decay that had haunted the forest since morning. You can't hurt me, Marcus, you know that. You've always known there are things in this world that bullets can't touch. Remember, Korea? Remember. The things you saw in the shadows that no one would believe? The rifle barrel wavered. He had seen things during the war, shapes in the darkness that had no business existing, sounds that had driven stronger men to madness. He'd convinced himself they were hallucinations brought on by combat stress and frostbite. But now, I've been waiting for you, the creature continued in Margaret's voice, the words emerging impossibly from its canine muzzle. Ever since you came to live in my forest, I've been patient, Marcus. I've watched you grieve, watched you suffer. But now, it's time to end your pain. Marcus pulled the trigger. The rifle shot echoed through the mountains like thunder, and he saw the bullet strike center mass. The creature staggered backward but didn't fall. Instead, it looked down at the wound with what might have been curiosity, then back at Marcus with those unblinking yellow eyes. It smiled. The sight of human-like lips pulling back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth was the most terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. "Come outside, darling. Don't make me come in and get you." Marcus backed away from the window. Rex pressed against his legs. The dog was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering, but he remained between Marcus and the door, a final act of loyalty even in the face of supernatural terror. Outside, the creature began to move again, those heavy footsteps circling the cabin with predatory patience. It was no longer trying to remain hidden. It knew Marcus had seen it, knew the game had changed. Now it was simply a matter of time. "I can wait, Marcus. I've waited this long. But you're going to get hungry eventually. You're going to get tired. And when you do, I'll be here. I'll always be here." Margaret's voice, filled with love and infinite patience, promising horrors that would make Korea look like a pleasant dream. Marcus pressed his back against the far wall, rifle clutched in his trembling hands, and realized that his long journey toward madness was about to reach its destination. The creature outside began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass mixed with Margaret's delighted giggle when he used to surprise her with wildflowers. It was the most beautiful and most terrifying sound Marcus had ever heard. The assault began at midnight. Something struck the cabin wall with the force of a sledgehammer, rattling the entire structure. Marcus, who had been dozing fitfully in his chair with his rifle across his knees, jerked awake as Rex erupted in frantic barking. Another impact shook the cabin, this time against the back wall, followed by another at the side. The creature was systematically testing the structure, searching for weaknesses. "Let me in, Marcus." Margaret's voice now edged with something that might have been irritation. "I'm so cold out here, darling, so very cold and lonely." A window exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The creature's massive, clawed hand reached through, feeling along the wall for the latch. Marcus fired point-blank into the searching appendage, but the bullets seemed to have no more effect than bee stings. The hand withdrew, and for a moment there was silence. Then the voices began. "Marcus, you left me behind." Tommy Patterson's voice, his war buddy who died at Chosin with his guts frozen to the ground. "You promised you'd get me home, but you left me behind. Why didn't you save me, Marcus?" Sarah's voice, his sister who died of pneumonia when they were children. "I called for you, but you didn't come." "You could have done more." His father's voice, stern and disappointing. "You could have saved us all, but you were too weak." The voices came from all around the cabin now, each one a perfect reproduction of someone Marcus had loved and lost. The creature was using his grief against him, weaponizing every regret he'd ever carried. Rex was howling continuously now, a sound of pure anguish that cut through the supernatural cacophony. Another window shattered, this time at the front of the cabin. Marcus saw the creature's face in the jagged opening, the wolf's head with two intelligent eyes and Margaret's voice emerging from its throat. "I forgive you for not saving me, Marcus. Come to me now, and I'll forgive you for everything." That's when Rex attacked. The German shepherd launched himself through the broken window with a courage that transcended his terror. He latched onto the creature's throat, his powerful jaws seeking the vulnerable flesh beneath the dark fur. For a moment, Marcus dared to hope. The creature looked down at the dog with something approaching surprise, then casually swatted Rex away as if he were a bothersome insect. The dog hit the cabin wall with a sickening crack and fell to the floor, whimpering. One of his legs was clearly broken. but he still tried to drag himself between Marcus and the creature. "Good dog," the creature said in Margaret's voice, sounding genuinely fond, "but you're in my way." What happened next would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. The creature reached down and with deliberate slowness began to tear Rex apart. Not quickly, not mercifully, but with methodical precision, maintaining eye contact with Marcus the entire time. Rex's agonized whimpering gradually faded to silence, but the creature continued its work until Marcus's loyal companion was nothing more than scattered pieces of fur and blood. Something inside Marcus broke, not just his heart, but something fundamental in his soul. Grief and rage overwhelmed his fear, creating a white-hot fury that burned away everything else. Rex had been the last living thing that mattered to him, and this abomination had destroyed him for sport. Marcus grabbed a burning log from the fireplace, its end glowing like a brand. "You want me?" he screamed. "Come and get me." He began throwing everything flammable onto the fire, furniture, books, curtains, even the precious wedding photo from his mantle. The cabin filled with smoke and the crackle of flames as Marcus turned his sanctuary into an inferno. If he was going to die, he was taking this thing with him. The creature watched his preparations with what might have been admiration. "You always were brave, Marcus. That's what I loved about you." But when the flames began to spread and the creature's fur caught fire, its demeanor changed entirely. The loving facade dropped away, revealing something ancient and malevolent that had never been human. It lunged through the burning doorway with a howl that was part agony, part supernatural fury, a sound that seemed to come from the very bowels of hell. Marcus dove through the back window as the roof began to collapse, the creature pursuing him through the flames. Its fur was burning, filling the air with the stench of charred meat and brimstone, but it kept coming with relentless determination. He ran toward the frozen river, his feet slipping on the icy rocks. Behind him, the burning creature howled in multiple voices now. Margaret, Tommy, Sarah, his father, and a dozen others he'd loved and lost. The sounds followed him through the forest like a symphony of the damned. The ice on the river was thick, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed a large rock and smashed through the frozen surface, the shock of the icy water stopping his heart for several terrifying seconds. The creature reached the riverbank just as Marcus submerged himself, and he could hear its frustrated howls echoing across the water. When he finally dragged himself onto the opposite bank, hypothermia was already setting in. His clothes were freezing to his body, and his hands had lost all feeling. But he was alive, and the creature had not followed him across the water. Perhaps it couldn't cross running water, or perhaps the fire had finally done enough damage to stop it. Marcus found shelter in a hollow log, using his survival training to create a makeshift windbreak from branches and snow. He spent the longest night of his life huddled there, listening to the sounds of his burning cabin and the occasional howl echoing from across the river. When dawn came, he was still alive. Marcus returned to the cabin site 3 days later, after hiking to the nearest ranger station for help. The official report would list the incident as an electrical fire that had tragically killed his dog. No one would believe the truth, and Marcus had no intention of trying to convince them. He'd learned in Korea that some truths were too terrible for civilized minds to accept. The cabin was nothing but blackened timbers and ash, but there was no sign of the creature's body. What he did find were Rex's remains, scattered across the clearing exactly as he remembered. The sight of his loyal companion's bones, picked clean by scavengers, brought him to his knees in the snow. Massive tracks surrounded the burned cabin, the same dinner plate-sized prints he'd found around the dead deer. They led away into the forest, eventually disappearing into rocky terrain where they left no trace. Whatever the creature was, it had survived the fire and was still out there somewhere in the vast wilderness. Marcus buried what remained of Rex beneath a cairn of stones, marking the grave with a simple wooden cross. As he worked, he could feel eyes watching him from the tree line, but when he looked up, he saw nothing but shadows and swaying branches. The new cabin they built for him was closer to civilization, only 10 miles from the nearest town. It had better radio equipment, solar panels, and all the modern conveniences that were supposed to make a ranger's life safer and easier. But safety was an illusion, and Marcus knew it, because every night, just after sunset, Margaret's voice called to him from the forest. "Marcus, darling, come to me. I'm waiting for you out here in the cold." Sometimes it was just her voice, sweet and loving. Other times it was joined by Rex's barking, Tommy's laughter, or his sister's singing. The creature was still out there, still patient, still using his grief as a weapon against him. Marcus installed heavy locks on his doors and bars on his windows. He kept his rifle loaded and within reach at all times. He never ventured into the forest alone, never stayed outside after dark, never allowed himself to forget that something was hunting him. But the voices were getting louder and more persuasive. Some nights, when the loneliness became unbearable and the weight of his losses threatened to crush him, Marcus found himself standing at his door with his hand on the lock. Margaret's voice would be so clear, so real, promising peace and an end to his suffering. All he had to do was step outside and join her forever. His replacement would find his body eventually. They'd assume he'd gone for a walk and gotten lost in the wilderness. People died in the mountains all the time. It was one of the hazards of living so close to the wild places of the world. Marcus knew this, just as he knew that every night brought him closer to giving in. The creature had infinite patience, and human grief was a finite resource. Eventually, everyone broke. The question wasn't whether he would join Margaret in the forest. The question was when, and on the nights when her voice was particularly sweet, when the promise of reunion felt more real than the cold reality of his empty cabin, Marcus wondered if that was really such a terrible thing after all. Outside his window, something moved in the shadows between the trees, and Margaret's voice drifted through the mountain air like a lullaby designed to call the lost home. "Soon, darling," she whispered. "Soon." My name is Thomas Reeves, and I wish I'd never taken those 3 boys into the mountains that winter. But I needed the money, and they needed someone to teach them how to survive in the wild. I just didn't know we'd be fighting for our lives. It was December 1963, and the snow had been falling for 4 straight days. What started as a simple weekend survival course in the Adirondack Mountains had turned into something much worse. The storm came out of nowhere, fierce and angry, like the mountains themselves wanted to trap us. I checked my watch again. 4 days. The snow was piled up 6 feet high around our little cabin, and it kept coming down like the sky was dumping ash on us. Every time I looked outside, all I could see was white. White everywhere, thick and heavy, making the world disappear. The wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls. We'd tried to stuff them with old rags and paper, but the cold still crept in. It made sounds like voices sometimes, low and moaning, like someone was crying just outside our door. The 3 boys sat around our wood stove, huddled together like scared animals. Billy Morrison was 19, rich kid from the city, whose father thought this trip would make him tough. Jake Fletcher was 20, quiet farm boy who wanted to join the Marines. Danny Walsh was only 18, skinny and pale, never spent a night away from his warm house before this. They all looked at me like I had answers, like I could fix this mess we were in. But the truth was, I was just as scared as they were. "Mr. Reeves," Danny said, his voice shaking, "when do you think the storm will stop?" I looked at him, this scared kid with snow in his hair and fear in his eyes. "Soon," I lied. "These mountain storms don't last forever." But I knew better. I'd lived in these mountains most of my life. My grandfather used to tell stories about storms like this, storms that trapped people for weeks. He'd tell stories about what happened to folks who got caught in them, stories I tried not to think about now. The radio had died on day 2, just went quiet in the middle of a weather report. We'd tried everything, new batteries, moving it around the cabin, even taking it apart and putting it back together. Nothing worked. We were cut off from the world, alone in this white prison. Our food was running low. We'd packed enough for 3 days, maybe 4 if we were careful. But we'd been here 4 days already, and I could see the worry in the boys' eyes every time they looked at our small pile of cans and dried meat. "How much food do we have left?" Billy asked. He'd been asking that question every few hours, like the answer might change. I counted again, though I knew the numbers by heart. "Enough for maybe 2 more days if we're smart about it." Jake stirred the fire with a stick. "What if the storm doesn't stop?" I didn't answer because I didn't want to scare them more than they already were. But the truth was, if this storm didn't break soon, we'd have to make some hard choices. The nearest town was 15 miles away through wilderness that had killed plenty of people over the years. In weather like this, it might as well have been 1,000 miles. Outside, the wind picked up again, shaking the cabin like it wanted to tear it apart. The old wood creaked and groaned, and somewhere in the walls I heard a scratching sound. Probably just mice, I told myself, or the wood expanding and contracting in the cold, but it sounded like claws. Danny pulled his jacket tighter around him. "It's getting colder in here." He was right. Even with the fire going strong, the cold was winning. Our breath came out in little white clouds, and ice was starting to form on the inside of the windows. The temperature outside had dropped to 30 below zero. I knew because I'd checked the thermometer that morning before it got too dark to read 30 below meant death waited just outside our door. No human could survive long in cold like that, not without proper gear, and we only had what we'd packed for a weekend camping trip. "We need to keep the fire going all night," I said. "Take turns watching it, can't let it die." The boys nodded, but I could see the fear growing in their eyes. They were starting to understand what I already knew. We might not make it out of here alive. As night fell, the silence outside became thick and heavy. No birds, no animals, nothing. Just the wind and the sound of snow hitting the windows. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, the kind that made you want to make noise just to prove you were still alive. I'd been in bad spots before. Korea, when my unit got cut off for 2 weeks in the mountains. Other times in these same forests when weather turned bad. But this felt different. This felt like the mountains themselves were angry, like they wanted to keep us here forever. Billy was looking at our food supplies again, counting them with his eyes. Jake sat silent, staring into the fire. Danny kept glancing at the windows, like he expected to see something looking back at him, and maybe he did, because as I settled down for the night, I could swear I heard something moving around outside, something big walking through the snow. But when I looked out the window, all I saw was darkness and falling snow. The scratching in the walls got louder as the night wore on, like something was trying to get in. Or maybe, I thought with a chill that had nothing to do with the cold, like something was trying to get out. I woke up to Billy shaking my shoulder. The fire had burned low, just red coals glowing in the dark. Outside, the wind had stopped. That should have been good news. But somehow, the silence felt worse than the howling. "Mr. Reeves," Billy whispered. "Something's wrong." I sat up, my back aching from sleeping on the hard floor. "What do you mean?" "Our food. The jerky we had hanging by the door. It's gone." I looked where he was pointing. Sure enough, the dried meat we'd strung up the night before was missing. The rope was still there, but the meat was gone. All of it. "Maybe it fell," I said, but I was already getting up to look around. We searched every corner of the cabin. Nothing. Jake was awake now too. Could an animal have gotten in? I checked the door. Still locked tight. The windows were all closed and latched. No holes in the walls big enough for anything to crawl through, but our food was gone. "This doesn't make sense," Danny said. He'd been quiet since we woke him up, just staring at the empty rope. I went outside to check for tracks. The snow had stopped falling, and everything was bright white in the morning light. But there were no animal tracks anywhere near the cabin. No paw prints, no claw marks, nothing. Just smooth snow all around us. That's when I found something else. Human teeth, 3 of them, yellow and old, stuck in the wood next to our door. They looked like they'd been there for years, but I swear they weren't there yesterday. I pulled them out and showed the boys. Danny went pale when he saw them. "Where did those come from?" Jake asked. I didn't have an answer. The teeth were worn down, filed sharp like fangs. Who would do that to their own teeth? And how long had they been in our door? The day passed slowly. We rationed our remaining food, eating just enough to keep going. Nobody talked much. We all kept looking at those teeth I'd set on the table. They seemed to stare back at us. That night the scratching started again, but this time it was different, louder, more urgent, like whatever was making the sound was bigger now, stronger. "It's just the cold," I told the boys. "Wood expands and contracts, makes noise." But I didn't believe it myself. Wood doesn't scratch in patterns. Wood doesn't sound like claws dragging across timber. Danny was the first to hear the breathing. "Listen," he whispered, holding up his hand for quiet. We all stopped talking and listened. At first, I didn't hear anything. Then, slowly, I picked it up. Heavy breathing just outside the cabin, slow and deep, like something big was standing right next to our walls. Billy grabbed the poker from beside the fire. "There's something out there." I took the axe from beside the door and motioned for them to stay back. Slowly, I looked out the window. Nothing but snow and dark trees. But the breathing continued. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there?" The breathing stopped. Everything went quiet. Then, after a long moment, it started again. Closer to the door this time. We spent the rest of the night taking turns watching the windows. Nobody slept much. Every time the wind picked up, we thought we heard voices in it, whispers in a language none of us knew. The next morning, Jake found the bones. He'd gone out to gather firewood and came running back, his face white with fear. "You need to see this," he said. Behind the cabin, scattered around what looked like an old fire pit, were human bones. Leg bones, arm bones, ribs, all of them cracked and split, like someone had been trying to get the marrow out. "How long have these been here?" Billy asked. I knelt down and picked up one of the bones. It was old, yellow with age, but some of them looked newer, fresher. My stomach turned. "This was a logging camp," I said. "Probably abandoned years ago. People died up here all the time back then." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the whole truth. These bones had been split open on purpose. Someone or something had been eating what was inside. That night, the smell started. A thick, rotten smell that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like meat left out in the sun for weeks. But it was winter, and everything was frozen. Nothing should smell like that in this cold. Danny started acting strange. He'd sit by himself, mumbling under his breath. When we asked him what he was saying, he'd just shake his head and move away from us. "I hear them calling," he said once when he thought we weren't listening. "They know my name." The temperature inside the cabin dropped even more. Despite keeping the fire burning bright, ice started forming on the inside walls. Our water froze, solid overnight, even though we kept it right next to the stove. On the 6th night, Billy saw his mother. "She's out there," he said, pointing to the window. "Standing by the trees. She's waving at me." I looked where he was pointing. I saw nothing but snow and darkness. But Billy kept staring, his face pressed against the cold glass. "She wants me to come outside," he whispered. "She says she's cold. She says she needs help." "Billy," I said, grabbing his shoulder, "your mother's not here. She's hundreds of miles away, safe in her house." He looked at me with wild eyes. I can see her. She's right there. Jake saw his sister the next night, standing in the same spot, wearing the same sad expression, beckoning him to come out into the cold. I was starting to understand what was happening to us. My grandfather had told me stories when I was young, stories about things that lived in the deep woods, things that came out when people were desperate and afraid, things that fed on hunger and desperation. The Wendigo, he called it, a creature that was once human, but hunger had changed it into something else, something that could never be full, no matter how much it ate. I'd always thought they were just stories, old tales to keep kids from wandering into the woods alone. But now, trapped in this cabin with the cold creeping in and our food almost gone, those stories didn't seem so impossible anymore, because something was out there in the dark. Something that knew we were hungry and afraid. Something that was waiting for us to give up, to come outside where it could reach us, and I was starting to think it had been waiting for a very long time. By the 7th day, we were down to our last can of beans and some crackers. I divided them into tiny portions, trying to make them last. But looking at those small bits of food on our plates, I knew we were in real trouble. Billy stared at his portion like it was the most important thing in the world. He ate each cracker, slowly, making it last as long as possible. Then he started looking at the rest of us in a way that made me uncomfortable. "We need more food," he said. "We're going to starve if this keeps up." "The storm will break soon," I told him, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. "Will it?" Billy asked. "How do you know? What if it doesn't? What if we're stuck here until we die?" Jake tried to calm him down. "Don't talk like that. Man, we're going to be okay." But Billy wasn't listening. He kept staring at our empty plates, then at us. "People have done things before," he said quietly, "when they were starving. People have eaten—" "Stop," I said firmly. "We're not there. Yet we're not even close." But I could see the thought taking root in his mind. The hunger was changing him, making him think about things no person should think about. That night, the creature showed itself. I was keeping watch while the others slept when I saw movement outside the window. Something tall was walking between the trees. Too tall to be human. Its legs were too long. Its arms reached almost to the ground. I grabbed the axe and moved closer to the window. The thing stopped walking and turned toward the cabin. Even in the darkness, I could see its face, or what was left of it. It looked like a person who had been dead for months. Skin hanging in strips, bones showing through in places. But its eyes were alive, bright and hungry. When it smiled, I saw teeth that had been filed to sharp points. The creature raised one long arm and tapped on the window. 3 slow taps. Then it spoke, and its voice sounded exactly like my dead brother. "Tommy," it said. "Tommy, let me in. I'm so cold out here." My brother had died in Korea 15 years ago. I'd held him while he bled out in the snow. But there he was, or something wearing his voice, standing outside our cabin. "I know you're hungry, Tommy," it continued. "I can help you. There's food here. Lots of food." I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. The thing kept talking in my brother's voice, telling me how hungry I must be, how the boys would understand if I did what I had to do. Then Billy woke up. "Who are you talking to?" he asked, sitting up. I turned to answer him, and when I looked back at the window, the creature was gone. But I could still hear its voice, fainter now, drifting on the wind. "You know what you have to do, Tommy. You know what they're for." Billy came over to the window and looked out. "I don't see anything." "It was there," I said. "Something was out there." Billy studied my face in the dim light. What did it look like? I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want to put those images in his head. But he kept asking, and finally I described what I'd seen. Billy listened quietly. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I saw it too," he said, 2 nights ago, but it looked like my dad told me the same things." We woke Jake and Danny. They'd both seen it as well. Jake's version looked like his girlfriend back home. Danny's looked like his little brother. All of them had said the same things about food, about hunger, about doing what we had to do. It's playing with us, I said, trying to make us crazy. Maybe we are crazy, Danny whispered. Maybe we're already dead and this is hell. The next morning, Billy started acting different. He'd sit by himself, staring at nothing. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at Jake and Danny with a strange expression, like he was measuring them. "Billy," I said, sitting down next to him, "you doing okay?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed too bright. "I'm so hungry, Mr. Reeves. I can't think about anything else. Food, food, food. It's all I think about." "No, we all are, but we'll get through this." Billy laughed, but it didn't sound right. "Will we? Look at us. We're getting weaker every day. Danny can barely stand up. Jake's ribs are showing through his shirt. How long before we're too weak to keep the fire going?" He was right, and that scared me. We were all losing weight fast. Our faces were getting thin and hollow. Danny had started sleeping most of the day, too weak to do much else. "And that thing outside," Billy continued, "it's not going anywhere. It's waiting for us to die, or waiting for us to give up and come outside. So what are you saying?" Billy was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at me. "I'm saying maybe there's another way. Maybe we don't have to wait to die." The way he said it made my blood run cold. I grabbed his arm. "Billy, listen to me. Don't think like that. Don't let it get into your head." But I could see it was too late. The hunger had taken hold of him, just like the creature wanted. It was turning him into something else, something that could think about the unthinkable. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept the axe close and watched Billy carefully. He was awake too, sitting by the dying fire, staring at Jake and Danny while they slept. Several times he got up and moved closer to them. Each time I tightened my grip on the axe handle. He'd look at me, see that I was watching, and sit back down, but I could see the hunger in his eyes growing stronger. Outside, the creature was moving around the cabin. I could hear its footsteps, in the snow, slow and heavy. Sometimes it would scratch at the walls or tap on the windows. Once, I heard it laughing, a sound like breaking glass. Soon, it whispered through the walls. Very soon now. I knew it was right. Billy was breaking down, and the rest of us were getting weaker. The cold was getting worse inside the cabin, even though we kept feeding the fire. Ice was thick on all the windows now, and our water had been frozen solid for 2 days. We were dying slowly, and the thing outside knew it. It was patient. It had all the time in the world, but I was starting to think patience wasn't going to be enough, because Billy was looking at that rusty old axe by the woodpile, and I could see him making plans that would keep him alive a little longer, plans that involved the rest of us. Dawn was still hours away, and I had to stay awake. I had to watch Billy every second, because I could feel it in the air now, thick and heavy like smoke. Something bad was going to happen, something that would change all of us forever. The creature outside knew it too. Its laughter was getting louder. I must have dozed off for just a few minutes. When I opened my eyes, Billy was gone from his spot by the fire. I sat up quickly, looking around the cabin. Jake and Danny were still sleeping in their corner. But where was Billy? Then I heard the sound of metal scraping against wood. I turned toward the sound and saw Billy by the woodpile, holding the old rusty axe. He was running his finger along the blade, testing how sharp it was. "Billy," I said quietly, not wanting to wake the others. "What are you doing?" He looked at me with wild eyes. His face was thin and hollow now, like a skull with skin stretched over it. "I can't take it anymore, Mr. Reeves. The hunger. It's eating me alive from the inside." "Put the axe down, son." "No." He shook his head. "You don't understand. I can hear it calling to me, the thing outside. It's telling me what I have to do." I stood up slowly, keeping my hands where he could see them. That thing is lying to you. It wants you to do something terrible. Don't listen to it." Billy laughed, but it wasn't his laugh anymore. It sounded like the creature outside. Terrible. Or smart. Look at Jake, look at Danny. They're dying anyway. We all are. But this way some of us can live. Jake stirred in his sleep, Billy's eyes fixed on him immediately like a cat watching a mouse. "Billy, listen to me," I said, taking a small step toward him. "You're not thinking straight. The hunger is making you crazy. You don't really want to hurt anyone, don't I?" Billy gripped the axe tighter. "I've been thinking about it for days, about how Jake would taste, about how much meat is on Danny's bones. And you know what? It doesn't bother me anymore." That's when Jake woke up. He opened his eyes and saw Billy standing over him with the axe. For a second, nobody moved. Then Jake scrambled backward, hitting the wall. "Billy, what are you doing?" Jake's voice cracked with fear. "I'm sorry, Jake, I really am, but I want to live. And this is the only way." Billy raised the axe above his head. I lunged forward, trying to reach him before he could bring it down, but I was weak from hunger too, and I wasn't fast enough. The axe came down hard. Jake threw up his arms to protect himself, and the blade caught him across the stomach instead of his head. Blood sprayed across the cabin floor, bright red against the wood. Jake screamed, a horrible animal sound that woke Danny and brought the creature outside running. I could hear its feet pounding through the snow, coming toward the cabin. I tackled Billy, and we both went down hard. The axe flew out of his hands and skittered across the floor. Billy fought like a wild animal, clawing at my face, trying to bite me. All the while, Jake was on the floor, holding his stomach, blood pouring between his fingers. "Help me," Jake gasped. "Please help me." But Billy wasn't done. He broke free from me and crawled toward Jake, his hands reaching for the blood. "Just a taste," he mumbled. "Just need a little taste." I grabbed the splitting maul from beside the door. It was heavy in my weak hands, but anger gave me strength. Billy was bent over Jake now, lapping at his blood like a dog. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Then I brought the maul down on Billy's skull. The sound it made was wet and hollow. Billy stopped moving immediately. His body went limp and fell sideways. His head caved in on one side. Danny was screaming now, pressed against the far wall. Jake was still bleeding, but the cut wasn't as deep as I'd first thought. He might live if I could stop the bleeding. That's when the roof exploded. The creature crashed through the cabin roof like it weighed nothing. Wood and snow rained down on us as something massive landed in the middle of our floor. I looked up and saw the Wendigo in all its horrible glory. It was 15 feet tall, thin as a skeleton, but strong as a bear. Its skin was gray and frozen, hanging in strips from its bones. Its face was mostly skull, with black holes where its eyes should be. But inside those holes, I could see tiny lights dancing, like stars in a night sky. Its breath came out in white. Clouds, and everywhere it touched, ice formed. The temperature in the cabin dropped so fast that Jake's blood started to freeze on the floor. The creature looked down at Billy's body, then at Jake, then at me. When it smiled, I saw rows of sharp teeth that went all the way back into its throat. "Finally," it said in a voice like winter wind. I was getting tired of waiting. I raised the maul, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. The creature laughed and reached for Jake with fingers like icicles. That's when I remembered. The kerosene. We'd been using it for our lamps, and there were 3 full cans by the door. I dropped the maul and grabbed one of the cans, pulling off the cap as the creature bent over Jake. "Hey!" I yelled. "Over here!" The Wendigo turned toward me, and I threw the kerosene right at its face. The liquid splashed across its frozen skin and soaked into the strips of hanging flesh. I grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fire and threw it at the creature. The Wendigo went up like a torch. Blue and white flames covered its body, and it let out a scream that shattered what was left of our windows. But it didn't fall down. It didn't even stop moving. Instead, it came toward me, burning and screaming, its claws reaching for my throat. grabbed the other 2 cans of kerosene and threw them at the walls. The whole cabin started to burn. Flames spread across the floor and up the walls. The heat was incredible, but the creature kept coming. Danny was screaming, Jake was moaning, and the Wendigo was burning alive right in front of me. But it wouldn't die. It kept reaching for me with those frozen claws, trying to grab me even as the fire ate away at its flesh. I ran for the door, pulling Jake with me. Danny stumbled after us, and we all fell out into the snow just as the entire cabin became a wall of fire. The cold hit us like a slap, 30 below zero, and we were out in it with nothing but the clothes on our backs. But behind us, the cabin burned like a funeral pyre, and inside it the Wendigo was finally dying. Its screams got quieter and quieter as the fire consumed it. Finally, there was just the sound of crackling flames and falling timber. Danny lasted about 10 minutes in the cold. His heart just gave out, probably from shock and fear and the freezing air. He fell face first into the snow and didn't get up. Jake was unconscious, bleeding into the white snow. I picked him up and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew we couldn't stay there. The fire wouldn't last forever, and I wasn't sure the creature was really dead. I walked for what felt like hours, carrying Jake through the deep snow. My feet went numb first, then my hands. I could feel the cold creeping into my bones, trying to kill me just like it had killed Danny. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it. An old ranger station, abandoned but still standing. I broke down the door and got us inside. There was no heat, but at least we were out of the wind. I wrapped Jake in everything I could find, old blankets, tarps, anything that might keep him warm. Then I started a fire in the old fireplace with matches I found in a drawer. Jake lived through the night, but just barely. In the morning I heard helicopters. The storm had finally broken, and someone had seen the smoke from our burning cabin. They found us half dead from cold and hunger. They took us to a hospital downstate, where the doctors said we were lucky to be alive. I told them that Billy had gone crazy from hunger and attacked Jake, that the cabin had caught fire during the fight, that Danny had died from exposure when we tried to escape. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? It made sense. People have done stranger things when they were starving, but I never told them about the creature, about the Wendigo that had been hunting us, about the voices that called our names in the dark. I never told them about the bite marks on my shoulder, where Billy's teeth had broken the skin when we fought, and I never told them about the dreams that started that winter. Dreams of hunger that never went away, dreams of meat and blood, and the taste of things no person should ever taste. Because sometimes, when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the trees, I can still hear that creature calling to me, telling me how hungry I am, telling me what I need to do to make the hunger stop. And the worst part is, some nights, when the hunger gets really bad, I almost listen. That was 20 years ago. Jake recovered from his wounds and went on to join the Marines like he'd planned. We stayed in touch for a while, but eventually we stopped writing. Some things are too hard to talk about, even with someone who was there. I never went back to teaching survival courses. Couldn't bring myself to take people into the woods anymore, knowing what was out there waiting. Instead, I got a job at a lumber yard in town. Safe work, indoor work, work that kept me away from the deep forest. But the mountains never let me go. Every winter, when the first snow starts to fall, I feel it stirring inside me. A hunger that regular food can't fill. It starts small, just a little gnawing feeling in my stomach, but as the snow gets deeper and the nights get longer, it grows stronger. I've learned to manage it over the years. I stock up on food before winter comes. Canned goods, dried meat, anything that will keep. I eat constantly during the cold months, trying to fill the empty space inside me. But it never works. The hunger is always there, waiting. The dreams are the worst part. In them, I'm back in that cabin with Billy and Jake and Danny, but this time, I'm the one holding the axe. This time, I'm the one looking at my friends and seeing food instead of people. I wake up from those dreams with my mouth watering and my hands shaking. Sometimes I find myself standing in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring at the knives in the drawer, thinking thoughts that no decent person should think. The bite marks on my shoulder never healed right. They left scars that looked like tiny crescent moons. During the worst part of winter, they itch and burn. Sometimes they even bleed a little, like they're fresh wounds. I've seen doctors about it. They give me creams and pills, but nothing helps. They don't understand that it's not a medical problem. It's something else. Something that started in those mountains and followed me home. 3 winters ago, it almost got me. I was having a particularly bad night. The snow was coming down heavy, just like it had in 1963. The hunger was so strong, I couldn't think about anything else. I kept opening the refrigerator, looking for something that would satisfy it. But there was nothing there that I wanted. That's when my neighbor knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson was 82 years old and lived alone next door. Her heat had gone out, and she was scared. Could she stay at my place until the repairman came in the morning? I let her in and made her some tea. She sat at my kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, telling me about her grandchildren. She was so small and frail, so helpless. And I started thinking about how easy it would be. The thoughts came fast and clear, like someone was whispering in my ear. She was old anyway, she wouldn't suffer much, and there was so much meat on her bones, even thin as she was. Enough to last me through the rest of the winter. I went to the kitchen drawer where I keep my knives. My hand was on the handle of the biggest one when I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the microwave door. My eyes looked different, hungry, wild, just like Billy's had looked that night in the cabin. I dropped the knife and ran outside, into the snow. I stayed out there for an hour, letting the cold freeze the evil thoughts out of my head. When I came back in, Mrs. Patterson was asleep on my couch. I covered her with another blanket and spent the rest of the night sitting across the room, making sure I didn't go near her. The repairman came first thing in the morning. Mrs. Patterson thanked me and went home, never knowing how close she'd come to ending up like Jake almost had. That's when I knew the curse was getting stronger. Each winter, it took more of me. Each year, it got harder to fight off the thoughts, the dreams, the hunger that never went away. I started making plans. If it ever got too bad, if I ever felt like I couldn't control it anymore, I knew what I had to do. There's a cliff about 10 miles north of town, high enough that it would be quick, clean. Better that than becoming the thing that had killed Billy. Better that than hurting innocent people. But so far, I've managed to hold on. Spring always comes eventually, and when it does, the hunger fades to a whisper. The dreams stop. The scars on my shoulder heal over for another year. I tell myself that I'm stronger than the curse, that I can beat it, but deep down, I know the truth. The Wendigo didn't die in that fire. Part of it survived, carried in Billy's bite. And every winter, that part grows a little stronger. Every year it gets a little harder to remember who I used to be. Sometimes I wonder if I should have died in those mountains with the others. Maybe that would have been better. Maybe that would have been the end of it, but I didn't die. I survived. And now I have to live with what that survival cost me. People in town think I'm just a quiet old man who keeps to himself. They don't know about the locked room in my basement where I go during the worst nights. They don't know about the chains I bought just in case. They don't know about the letters I've written, but never sent, explaining what really happened in those mountains 20 years ago. They don't know that every winter when the snow starts to fall, I become something that's not quite human anymore, but I know, and Jake knows, though we've never talked about it. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me. The understanding, the fear. He knows what I'm becoming. He knows what we all could have become if we'd stayed in those mountains just a little longer. The snow is starting to fall again tonight. I can see it through my kitchen window, thick white flakes that remind me of ash from a funeral pyre. The hunger is stirring again, waking up like a bear coming out of hibernation. I've already eaten 3 times today, but it doesn't matter. Nothing fills the empty space inside me. Nothing satisfies the craving that grows stronger with each passing hour. In a few hours, I'll go down to the basement. I'll lock myself in that room and wait for morning. I'll fight the dreams and the hunger and the voice that sounds like Billy, whispering in my ear about how easy it would be. I'll fight it like I have every winter for 20 years. But I'm getting older now, weaker, and the curse is getting stronger. I don't know how many more winters I can hold out. I don't know how much longer I can keep the monster inside me caged. All I know is that somewhere out there in the deep woods, in places where the snow never melts completely, there are others like me. Others who survived encounters with things that should have killed them. Others who carry pieces of the hunger inside them, and on nights like this, when the snow falls heavy and the wind sounds like voices calling our names, we all feel it stirring, the hunger that never dies, the curse that follows us home, the price we pay for surviving when maybe we should have died. But we didn't die. We're still here, still fighting, still hungry, and somewhere in the darkness outside my window, I can hear it laughing. My name is Jeremiah Boudreau, but everyone calls me Jerry. I'm 45 years old, and I've lived in these Louisiana swamps my whole life. Tonight, I'm paddling my small boat through the dark water, trying to stay quiet as I can. I've been alone in this swamp for 2 years now. Before that, I had my brother Claude living with me. We ran the moonshine business together, just like our daddy and his daddy before him. The Boudreau family has been making whiskey in these swamps since we came here from Canada way back. Claude was younger than me by 3 years. He had dark hair like mine and the same green eyes that run in our family. People always said we looked like twins, just born at different times. Claude could make anyone laugh, even when times were hard. He had a way of telling stories that made you forget your troubles. We grew up speaking French, the old Cajun French that our grand-mère taught us. When we were little, she would sit on the porch and tell us stories about the old days. She told us about monsters in the swamp, creatures that could change their shape and hunt people at night. Back then, I thought they were just made-up stories to keep us kids from wandering off alone. Grand-mère gave me a rosary when I turned 18. It has silver medals on it that she said were blessed by a priest. She made me promise to always wear it. Evil things don't like blessed silver, she used to say. I still wear it now, even though I stopped going to church after what happened to Claude. 2 years ago, the federal agents came to our old place near Breaux Bridge. They had guns and badges, and they said we were under arrest for making illegal whiskey. Claude and I tried to run, but they chased us through the woods. I made it to the swamp, but Claude wasn't as fast as me. I heard the gunshots behind me as I was jumping into my boat. 3 shots, one right after the other. Then everything went quiet except for my heart beating so loud I thought it might explode. I waited in the trees all night, hoping Claude would find me, but he never came. The next morning, I snuck back and found his body lying in the mud near our old still. The federal agents had left him there like he was nothing, like his life didn't matter at all. I buried my brother by myself in our family cemetery behind the old house. I said the prayers grand-mère taught me, but I don't think God was listening that day. After that, I packed everything I could carry and moved deeper into the swamp where nobody could find me. Now I live alone on Shell Island with just my dog, Boudreau. I named him after our family name. He's a good dog, part hunting hound, part something else. He's brown and black with white on his chest, and he's got the smartest eyes I've ever seen on a dog. Boudreau has been with me since he was a puppy, and he's the only friend I have left in this world. Every day, I think about leaving Louisiana. I could sell my boat and my still, take what money I have, and start over somewhere else. Maybe go to Texas or Arkansas where nobody knows my name. But every time I try to pack my things, something stops me. This swamp is in my blood. My family has lived here for over 200 years. We came here when the British threw us out of Canada, and we made this wild place our home. The water, the trees, the animals, they're all part of me now. Leaving would be like cutting off my own arm. Besides, where would I go? I don't know how to do anything except make moonshine and live in the swamp. In the city, I'd just be another poor Cajun man with no education and no skills. At least here I'm free, but freedom comes with a price. The loneliness gets to you after a while. Sometimes I talk to Boudreaux just to hear a voice, even if it's my own. Sometimes I talk to Claude like he's still here with me. I tell him about my day, about the fish I caught, or the batch of moonshine I'm working on. The worst part is the nights. That's when I miss Claude the most. We used to sit on the porch after dinner and talk about everything. Women, money, plans for the future. Now I just sit by myself with Boudreaux at my feet, listening to the swamp sounds and trying not to think too much. I planned to leave right after Claude died. I was going to disappear one night and never come back. But the swamp holds on to you, like quicksand. The deeper you sink into this life, the harder it gets to pull yourself out. Things started getting strange about a month ago. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. When you live alone for too long, you start seeing things that aren't there and hearing sounds that don't make sense. The first thing I noticed was the alligators. They disappeared from all their usual spots. For 45 years, I've known where every big gator lives in this part of the swamp. There's old Henry, who likes to sun himself on the log near the big cypress. There's Mama Gator, who has her nest by the fallen tree. And there's Big Joe, the biggest gator I've ever seen, who lives in the deep water near the channel. But one morning, they were all gone. Every single one of them. I paddled around for hours looking for them, but I couldn't find a single alligator anywhere. That scared me more than seeing 100 of them would have. The fish disappeared too. I have fishing lines set up all over the swamp. We call them trot lines. I check them every morning, and they're usually full of catfish and bass. But for the past month, I've been pulling up empty hooks. Even the crawfish traps are coming up with nothing in them. It's like all the animals just packed up and left. But animals don't do that unless something really bad is coming, something that scares them more than anything else in the swamp. Then came the sounds. At night, I started hearing howls coming from deep in the swamp. At first, I thought it might be coyotes. We have them around here sometimes, but these howls were different. They were louder and longer, and they made my skin crawl. They sounded almost human, but not quite. Boudreaux hears them too. When the howling starts, he comes running to me with his tail between his legs. He won't leave the porch anymore after dark. This is a dog who used to chase alligators for fun, and now he's scared to go outside. Last week, I found something that made my blood run cold. There were claw marks scratched into the bark of the big cypress tree right next to my cabin. These weren't small scratches like a raccoon or a possum would make. These were deep gouges, like something with claws as big as my fingers had tried to climb the tree. The weird thing is, the scratches were too high up. Even a black bear couldn't reach that high, and bears don't have claws that long anyway. Whatever made those marks had to be at least 8 feet tall. I started sleeping with my shotgun next to my bed. It's an old pump action that belonged to my daddy. I keep it loaded with buckshot, which will stop anything that walks in these swamps. At least that's what I tell myself. A few nights ago, something moved my boat. I always pull it up onto the shore and tie it to a tree stump. I've been doing it the same way for 20 years. But when I woke up that morning, my boat was floating in the water about 20 feet from where I left it. The rope was still tied to the stump, but it looked like something had picked up the whole boat and moved it. The muddy bottom where the boat usually sits was covered with footprints, big footprints with what looked like claws at the end of each toe. I measured them with my hand. They were almost twice as long as my foot, and my foot is pretty big. Whatever made those tracks was a lot bigger than me. That same day, I found my still had been messed with. Someone or something had twisted the copper tubing into knots. It would take a really strong person to bend that thick copper pipe, and I don't know anyone who could tie knots that tight. I spent the whole day fixing it, and my hands were shaking the entire time. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something watching me from the trees. The worst part is the silence. The swamp used to be full of sounds at night. Frogs croaking, birds calling, insects buzzing. Now everything goes quiet at the same time, like someone turned off a radio. The silence is so thick you can almost touch it. When that happens, I know something big is moving through the swamp, something that makes every other living thing hold its breath and hide. Last night, I saw eyes watching me from across the water, yellow eyes that reflected the light from my kerosene lamp. They were too far apart to be a person's eyes, and too high off the water to be an alligator. I shined my flashlight in that direction, but whatever it was had already disappeared. All I saw were the cypress trees swaying in the wind, even though there wasn't any wind that night. I'm starting to think those stories Grandmère used to tell weren't just stories after all. She always said there were things in the deep swamp that people shouldn't mess with, things that were here long before the first people came to Louisiana. I used to laugh at those old tales. Now I'm not laughing anymore. 3 nights ago, I saw my dead brother Claude. I was sitting on my porch after dinner, cleaning my shotgun like I do every night now. Boudreau was lying at my feet, but he kept lifting his head and looking out at the water. His ears were up and alert, like he was listening for something. The moon was bright that night, almost full. It made the water look like a mirror, and I could see pretty far across the swamp. That's when I saw someone standing on the other side of the channel, maybe 50 yards away. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but when I looked closer, I could see it was a man about my size. He had dark hair and was wearing clothes like mine, old jeans and a work shirt. Then he called my name. "Jerry, Jerry, it's me!" The voice made my blood freeze. It sounded exactly like Claude. Same accent, same way of saying my name. I dropped my shotgun and stood up so fast I almost fell over. "Claude?" I called back. "Is that really you?" The figure waved at me. "Yeah, it's me, brother. I've been looking for you." I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My brother had been dead for 2 years. I buried him myself. But there he was, standing across the water like nothing had ever happened. "How are you here?" I shouted. "You're supposed to be dead." "It's a long story, Jerry. Come over here so we can talk proper." Something in his voice didn't sound quite right. It was Claude's voice, but there was something else mixed in with it. Something that made my skin crawl. Boudreau started growling low in his throat. The hair on his back was standing up and he was staring at the figure across the water. Dogs know things that people don't. And Boudreau was telling me something was wrong. But I wanted to believe it was really Claude. I missed my brother so much that I was willing to ignore the warning signs. I climbed into my boat and started paddling across the channel. As I got closer, I could see the figure more clearly. It looked exactly like Claude. Same face, same build, even the same scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike as a kid. "I knew you'd come," he said when I was about 20 feet away. "You always were the smart one, Jerry." But when he smiled, something was wrong with his teeth. They looked too sharp, too white, and his eyes were yellow in the moonlight, just like the eyes I'd been seeing watching me from the darkness. "Where have you been, Claude?" I asked, keeping my boat in the water. "Something told me not to get too close." "I've been hiding, just like you. Those federal agents didn't kill me, Jerry. They just hurt me real bad. I've been living deeper in the swamp, trying to get better." That made sense, I guess. Maybe he had just been wounded and crawled away to heal. Maybe he'd been lost and couldn't find his way back to me. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" I asked. "I was hurt bad, Jerry, real bad. And I changed. The swamp changed me." As he said this, he stepped closer to the water's edge. In the moonlight, I could see that he was bigger than I remembered, taller and wider across the shoulders. His hands looked strange too, longer fingers with what looked like claws instead of fingernails. "You need to come with me, Jerry," he said. "I found a better place for us to live, deeper in the swamp where nobody will ever find us." "I don't know, Claude. I got my still here, my cabin, everything I need." His face changed when I said that. For just a second, it didn't look like Claude at all. It looked like something wild and hungry. Then it went back to normal, but I had seen enough. "You don't trust me?" he asked, and his voice sounded hurt. "I'm your brother, Jerry. We've always stuck together. If you're really Claude, then tell me something only he would know." He smiled that too sharp smile again. "Remember when we were kids and Grandmère caught us stealing her pralines? She made us sit in the corner for 2 hours and you cried because you thought she didn't love us anymore. My heart jumped. That was exactly what had happened. Only Claude would know that story. Maybe it really was my brother after all. And remember what Grandmère used to say about the rougarou," he continued. "She said it was a monster that could look like anyone it wanted. She said it would come for bad people who didn't go to church." Now I was really confused. Why would Claude bring up those old stories? And why did his voice sound different when he said the word rougarou? It sounded like he was tasting the word, enjoying it. "Come on, Jerry," he said, holding out his hand. "Let's go to our new home." That's when Boudreaux started barking. Not just regular barking, but the kind of desperate barking that means real danger. He was still on my porch, but he was jumping up and down and barking like he was trying to warn me about something. I looked back at Claude, and for a moment, I saw his true face. The eyes were yellow and wild, the mouth was full of teeth like a wolf, the hands were claws, and he was much, much bigger than my brother had ever been. Then the face changed back to Claude's, but I had seen enough. "You're not my brother," I said, backing my boat away from the shore. "Jerry, what are you talking about? Of course I'm Claude. Don't let that old dog fool you," but I was already paddling hard back toward my cabin. Behind me, I heard the thing that looked like Claude let out a howl that made my bones shake. It wasn't human. It was the same howl I'd been hearing at night for the past month. When I got back to my porch, Boudreaux was still barking and jumping around. I looked across the water, but the thing pretending to be Claude was gone. I sat down hard in my chair and tried to catch my breath. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my shotgun. Grandmère's stories weren't just stories. After all, there really was something in the swamp that could look like other people. Something that knew things it shouldn't know, and it wanted me to come with it. After that night, I knew the thing wasn't going to leave me alone. It had found me, and now it was going to keep coming back until it got what it wanted. I just didn't know what that was yet. The next morning, I found paw prints all around my cabin. They were huge, bigger than any dog or wolf I'd ever seen. They circled my place like the creature had been walking around and around, looking for a way in. Some of the prints were right under my bedroom window. The thought of that thing watching me sleep made my skin crawl. I spent the whole day making my cabin safer. I nailed boards over the windows that didn't already have them. I moved my bed away from the walls. I checked my shotgun 3 times to make sure it was loaded and ready, but I knew regular bullets wouldn't be enough. Grandmère always said that monsters like this could only be killed with blessed silver. I had the silver medals on my rosary, but that wasn't going to help me much in a fight. Then I remembered something. When I was a kid, Grandmère made my daddy melt down some old silver coins and pour them into bullet molds. She had a priest bless them, and Daddy kept them in a special box. I wondered if those bullets were still at the old family house. That afternoon, I paddled back to where I grew up. The house was empty and falling apart now, but I knew where Daddy kept his important things. In the back of his closet, behind some old clothes, I found the wooden box. Inside were 12 silver bullets, each one carved with a small cross. They were tarnished black with age, but they were still good. I cleaned them up and loaded 6 into my shotgun. The other 6 I put in my pocket. If Grandmère was right, these would stop whatever was hunting me. That night, I sat on my porch with my shotgun across my knees and waited. Boudreaux was pressed against my legs, shaking. He knew something bad was coming just like I did. Around midnight, the swamp went quiet. Not a single sound anywhere. No frogs, no birds, no insects. It was like the whole world was holding its breath. Then I heard my name being called from the darkness. Jerry? Jerry, where are you? It was Claude's voice again, but this time it sounded sad and lonely. Like he was lost and needed help. I'm hurt, Jerry. I need you to help me. The voice was coming from different places. First from across the water, then from behind my cabin, then from the trees to my left. It was like the thing was moving around me in a circle, but I couldn't see it anywhere. Please, Jerry, I'm bleeding. I think I'm dying. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Even though I knew it wasn't really Claude, part of me still wanted to help. That's what the creature was counting on, my love for my brother. You're not Claude, I called out into the darkness. My brother is dead. I buried him myself. The voice changed then. It got deeper and more angry. You left me, Jerry. You ran away and left me to die. Now I'm going to make you pay. Something big crashed through the trees near my cabin. I could hear branches breaking and leaves rustling as it moved. It was getting closer. Boudreaux started barking and ran to the edge of the porch. His hair was standing up all over his body and he was showing his teeth. Good boy, I whispered. You stay close to me. Then I saw it. The creature stepped out of the tree line about 30 feet away from my cabin. In the moonlight, I could see what it really looked like. It was standing on 2 legs like a man, but it was much taller, maybe 8 feet high. Its body was covered in dark fur, and its arms were long and muscular. The hands ended in claws that looked like they could tear through wood. The head was the worst part. It was shaped like a wolf's head, but bigger. The mouth was full of teeth as long as my fingers. The eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, and they were looking right at me. But the most horrible thing was that it still had Claude's face mixed in. Somehow, like someone had taken my brother's face and stretched it over a monster's skull. Hello, Jerry, it said in Claude's voice coming from that terrible wolf mouth. I told you I'd changed. I raised my shotgun and pointed it at the creature. My hands were shaking, but I managed to keep it steady. Stay back, I warned. I've got silver bullets. The thing threw back its head and laughed. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard, part human laugh, part wolf howl. It made my bones ache. Silver bullets? You've been listening to Grandmère's old stories too much, Jerry. Those are just fairy tales. But I noticed it stopped walking toward me when I mentioned the silver. Maybe Grandmère's stories weren't so crazy after all. What do you want from me? I asked. I want you to come with me, brother. I want you to join me. We can hunt together. In the deep swamp. We can be family again. You killed my brother. You're not family. I didn't kill Claude, Jerry. I am Claude. This is just my new form. The swamp changed me, made me stronger. It can change you too. The creature started walking. Toward my cabin again, slow and careful. Each step made the wooden boards of my porch shake. All you have to do is let me bite you, Jerry. Just one little bite and you'll be like me. We'll never be apart again. That's when I understood. This thing didn't just want to kill me. It wanted to turn me into a monster like itself. It wanted me to become something that hunted people in the darkness. I thought about Grandmère's stories. She said the rougarou could turn people into monsters with its bite. She said that's how it made more of its kind. I'd rather die, I told. The creature. That can be arranged too, it growled. And suddenly it didn't sound like Claude anymore. It sounded like the wild animal it really was. The thing got ready to jump at my porch. I could see its muscles bunching up under its fur. I took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger of my shotgun. The silver shot hit the creature right in the chest. It let out a scream that was part human, part animal. The sound was so loud it made my ears ring. The thing stumbled backward, black blood pouring from the wound. Where the silver had hit, its fur was smoking like it was on fire. "You shot me," it cried in Claude's voice, sounding hurt and surprised. "How could you shoot? Your own brother?" But I could see the silver was working. The creature was hurt bad, clutching its chest and breathing hard. "You're not my brother," I said, pumping another shell into my shotgun. "My brother would never try to turn me into a monster." The creature's face changed from Claude's to the wolf thing and back again, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to look like. It was angry now, really angry. "Fine," it growled. "If you won't come willingly, I'll just have to take you by force." That's when Boudreaux did something that saved my life. My brave dog jumped off the porch and ran straight at the monster. He was barking and snarling, trying to protect me, even though he was scared out of his mind. The creature grabbed Boudreaux in its claws and threw him against a tree. I heard my dog yelp once, then he went quiet. I knew he was dead, and it broke my heart. But Boudreaux had given me the time I needed. While the creature was distracted, I aimed my shotgun and fired again. This time the shot hit it in the shoulder. More black blood sprayed everywhere, and the thing howled in pain and rage. It looked at me with those yellow eyes, and I could see pure hatred there. It wasn't going to try to trick me anymore. Now it just wanted to kill me. The creature charged at my porch, moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. It jumped up and crashed through the wooden railing like it was made of paper. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The thing grabbed me with one clawed hand and lifted me off my feet. Its grip was so strong I thought it was going to crush my ribs. "Now you're going to learn what happens when you hurt me," it snarled. It raised its other hand to slash at me with its claws, but I still had my shotgun. I pressed the barrel against its stomach and pulled the trigger. The blast at close range nearly tore the creature in half. It dropped me and fell backward, screaming and thrashing around on my porch. Black blood was everywhere, soaking into the wooden boards. I thought it was dead, but it wasn't. Somehow it started to get back up. The silver was hurting it, but it wasn't enough to kill it. I reached into my pocket for more shells, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped them. They rolled across the porch and fell through the cracks into the water below. The creature saw what happened and smiled with that mouth full of teeth. "Looks like you're out of bullets, Jerry," it said. "Now, it's my turn." I was trapped. The thing was between me and my cabin door. I couldn't get past it to reload my gun. All I had left was the blessed silver rosary around my neck. The creature lunged at me again, but this time I was ready. I pulled Grand'Mère's rosary off my neck and wrapped it around my fist. When the thing grabbed me, I punched it in the face, as hard as I could. The silver medals burned into its skin like hot coals. The creature screamed and let go of me, clawing at its face where the rosary had touched it. I saw my chance and ran for my cabin. Inside, I had Daddy's old hunting knife. It had a silver blade that Grand'Mère had blessed years ago. If I could get to it, maybe I could finish this thing off. But the creature recovered faster than I expected. Just as I reached my door, it grabbed me from behind. Its claws dug into my shoulder, cutting deep into the muscle. The pain was so bad, I almost passed out. I spun around and tried to fight it off, but it was too strong. It pinned me against the wall of my cabin and opened, its mouth wide. I could see those terrible teeth getting closer to my neck. That's when I remembered the knife on my belt. It wasn't silver, but it was sharp. I pulled it out and drove it deep into the creature's side. The thing roared and backhanded me across the face. I flew backward and hit the wall hard enough to crack the wood. Stars exploded in front of my eyes, and I tasted blood in my mouth. But the knife wound had slowed it down. I crawled across the floor of my cabin toward where I kept Daddy's silver. Knife! The creature was right behind me, bleeding and angry. My fingers closed around the handle of the silver knife just as the thing grabbed my leg. I rolled over and slashed at it with the blade. The silver cut through its arm like butter. The creature screamed and let go of me. Where the knife had cut, the wound was glowing white-hot. I scrambled to my feet and back toward the corner of my cabin. The creature was hurt bad now, but it wasn't giving up. It crouched down like it was getting ready to jump at me one more time. "This ends now," I said, raising the silver knife. The creature leaped through the air at me, claws extended and mouth open wide. I waited until the last second, then drove the silver blade straight into its heart. We both fell to the floor together. The thing was on top of me, its weight crushing me down, but I could feel the life going out of it. The silver was doing its work. "Jerry," it whispered in Claude's voice, and for a moment it looked like my brother again. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help what I became." Then it went still. I lay there under the dead creature for a long time, trying to catch my breath. My shoulder was bleeding bad, and I felt weak and dizzy. But I was alive. I had killed the thing that had been hunting me. When I finally got the strength to push the body off me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On my arm, where the creature had grabbed me, there were deep bite marks. They were already starting to turn black around the edges. I remembered what Grand-mère used to say about the rougarou. Its bite carried a curse. Anyone who got bitten would become a monster themselves when the moon was full. I looked out my broken window at the sky. The moon was almost full now, maybe 3 more nights. I dragged the creature's body outside and burned it with kerosene from my still. The flames turned strange colors, blue and green and purple. The smoke smelled like sulfur and rotting meat. When it was done burning, I buried poor Boudreau under the big cypress tree. He had been a good dog, and he deserved better than what happened to him. Then I went back inside my cabin and wrote this story down. I wanted someone to know what really happened out here in case I don't make it. The bite marks on my arm are getting worse. They're spreading up toward my shoulder, and they burn like fire. I can feel something changing inside me, something wild and hungry. I've got 3 silver bullets left. When the moon gets full, if I feel myself turning into that thing, I'm going to use them. I won't let myself become a monster that hurts innocent people. If you find this story, burn my cabin down. Burn everything. Don't let whatever's in me spread to anyone else. The moon is rising now, and I can feel it calling to something deep in my blood, something that wants to hunt. I'm going to chain myself to the big support post in my cabin. Maybe the chains will hold long enough for me to come back to my senses. If they don't, well, I guess this old swamp will have one more monster living in it. I just hope I never see another human face out here, because if I do, I might not be strong enough to stop myself from making them just like me. The curse has to end somewhere. Let it end with me. The moon is full above me, shining through the Spanish moss that hangs from the old cypress trees like grey curtains. The moss makes strange shadows on the black water. Everything looks spooky out here at night, but I'm used to it. This swamp has been my home forever. My paddle cuts through the water without making a sound. I learned how to do that from my daddy when I was just a boy. Green stuff floats on top of the water. We call it algae. It sticks to my boat as I move through it. All around me, the swamp is alive with sounds. Bullfrogs are croaking their deep songs. I hear a nightbird calling somewhere in the trees. An alligator splashes in the distance, probably catching a fish. For dinner, these sounds don't scare me anymore. They're like old friends. I'm heading to my secret place, a small island we call Shell Island. That's where I keep my still. A still is what I use to make moonshine, which is homemade whiskey. It's not legal, but it's how I make money to live. The still is made of copper pipes that shine in the light from my kerosene lamp. I built it myself, just like my daddy taught me. The copper gets hot when I'm cooking the moonshine, and it makes my hands smell like metal. I have to be real careful these days. Federal agents, government men, have been coming around Breaux Bridge asking questions about people making illegal whiskey. That's why I moved my operation deeper into the swamp, where nobody can find me. The air out here is thick and heavy. It's hard to breathe sometimes, especially on hot nights like this. Everything smells like plants growing and dying at the same time. That's just how the swamp is, life and death all mixed together. These cypress trees are old, really old. Some of them have been here since before my great-grandparents came to Louisiana. They grow right out of the water, their roots making little islands and hiding places. The trees look like the columns in a church, reaching up to the sky. My cabin sits on wooden legs above the water, just in case the swamp floods. It does that sometimes when we get bad storms. You can only get to my place if you know the secret. Ways through the water channels. I've been living here alone for 2 years now, and I like it that way. I shine my flashlight ahead of me as I paddle. The light catches the eyes of alligators floating in the water. Their eyes glow red in the light, but they don't bother me. I know how to stay away from them, and they mostly leave me alone too. Suddenly, I hear a sound that makes me stop paddling. It's a screech owl, but this cry is different. It's louder and longer than usual. It sounds almost like it's in pain, or maybe scared of something. I sit still in my boat listening. The swamp has gone quiet except for that owl. Even the bullfrogs have stopped croaking. When the swamp goes quiet like this, it usually means something big is coming through, maybe a big gator or a black bear. But this feels different. I've lived in these swamps for 45 years, and I know when something's not right. My skin gets goosebumps, and the hair on my arms stands up. I paddle faster toward Shell Island, where my still is waiting. I need to check on my moonshine and make sure everything's okay. The federal agents might be getting closer, and I can't afford to lose my still. It's the only way I have to make money. As I get closer to my island, I can see the light from my kerosene lamp shining through the trees. It looks warm and safe, like a lighthouse in the darkness. But that owl is still making its weird cry, and I can't shake the feeling that something bad is coming. I tie my boat to a cypress root and climb onto the island. My boots sink a little into the soft mud. Tomorrow, I'll have to check if the federal agents have been asking more questions in town. For now, I just want to tend to my still and try to forget about that strange owl cry. But deep down, I know something has changed in my swamp tonight. Something that's going to make my life a whole lot more dangerous. My name is Rebecca Sullivan, but most folks just call me Becca. I wish I could tell you this story has a happy ending, but it doesn't. Some stories are just meant to warn people about the things that hide in the dark corners of our world. It was October 1988, and I was guiding another hunting trip into the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. The mist that morning hung over the mountains like smoke from a dying campfire. It was thick and gray, making all the familiar trails and landmarks disappear. I'd been through these woods hundreds of times, but that day, everything felt different. Was walking ahead of my clients, Frank and Michael Kowalski, father and son from Pittsburgh. We were heading to a hunting cabin I knew well, tucked away in a little valley between two forested hills. The trees around us were dressed in their fall colors, bright orange maples and deep red oaks that should have been beautiful. But something felt wrong about the whole scene. "How much further, Becca?" Frank called out behind me. He was carrying his grandfather's old Winchester rifle, the same one his family had used for hunting trips for years. His son Michael, just 17 years old, had a compound bow slung over his shoulder. The kid was trying hard to keep up and look tough, but I could see he was nervous. "Not far now," I said, pushing through some low branches. "Maybe another half-mile," but as we walked, I started noticing things that made my skin crawl. The weather was all wrong for October. It should have been cool and crisp, but it was warm and sticky like summer. The kind of warm that makes your clothes stick to your skin and makes you feel like a storm is coming, and that's exactly what was happening. Even though the morning radio had promised clear skies, I could see dark storm clouds building up on the horizon. They were moving fast, too fast for normal weather. The worst part was the silence. These woods were usually full of sounds: birds singing, squirrels chattering, leaves rustling with small animals moving around. But that day, it was quiet as a grave. The only sounds were our footsteps and our breathing. "Where are all the deer?" Michael asked, looking around nervously. "Dad, you said there would be deer sign everywhere." Frank stopped and looked around too. He was right to be worried. In all my years guiding hunters through these mountains, I'd never seen the woods so empty. No deer tracks in the mud, no droppings, no places where they'd been eating or sleeping. It was like every animal had just packed up and left. "They'll be here," Frank said, but he didn't sound sure. Maybe they're just spooked by the weather. I didn't say anything, but my military training was kicking in. Something was very wrong here. In the army, I'd learned to trust my gut when things didn't feel right. And right now, every instinct I had was screaming that we should turn around and go home. But I couldn't do that. Frank had paid me good money for this trip, and I needed every dollar I could get. Being a disabled veteran didn't pay much, and guiding hunting trips was one of the few ways I could make a living in these mountains. We finally reached the cabin just as the first drops of rain started to fall. It was a simple wooden building, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it was dry and had a good fireplace. Frank and Michael dropped their gear and started setting up while I checked the windows and doors. That's when I saw them. Red lights in the distance, pulsing like a heartbeat. They were too bright and too regular to be anything natural. I'd seen plenty of strange things in these mountains, but nothing like this. "Hey, Becca," Michael called out. "The radio's not working right." I went over to where he was fiddling with a small battery radio. Instead of music or news, all we could get was static and the occasional emergency broadcast about atmospheric disturbances in the area. Probably just the storm. I said, but I didn't believe it myself. As the afternoon wore on, the feeling of wrongness just got stronger. The temperature kept dropping, even though it had been warm all day. By evening, there was actual frost forming on the cabin windows. In October, in weather that had been summer hot just hours before, Frank started complaining about a headache, and I noticed Michael kept looking out the windows like he was expecting to see something or someone. The red lights kept pulsing in the distance, and every time I looked at them, I got a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. My grandmother used to tell me stories about these mountains, about things that lived in the deep woods and only came out when something terrible was about to happen. I'd always thought they were just stories meant to scare children, but sitting in that cabin, watching those red lights pulse in the darkness, I started to think maybe Grandma knew more than I'd given her credit for. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones, and whatever it wasn't going to be good. That first night in the cabin, we sat around the fireplace trying to stay warm. The frost on the windows was getting thicker, which made no sense at all. Frank kept rubbing his temples like his head hurt, and Michael just stared at the fire without saying much. "So, Becca," Frank said, "Michael here thinks you might have been in the army. That true?" I nodded. "Yeah, I was a medic for 4 years. Got out in '84. "See any action?" Frank asked. He seemed genuinely curious, not just making small talk. "Some," I said. I didn't like talking about Grenada, but these folks had a right to know who. They were trusting with their lives out here. I was in a helicopter crash, lost my whole unit. Michael looked up from the fire. "That's terrible, I'm sorry." "It happens," I said, even though it never stopped hurting. "That's why I like it out here in the woods. It's peaceful, usually." Frank leaned back in his chair. "This rifle belonged to my grandfather," he said, holding up the Winchester. "My dad used it, and now I'm hoping to pass it down to Michael here. This hunting trip, it's kind of a family tradition." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, I told you, I'm not sure hunting is really my thing." "Come on, son. You're 17. Time to become a man." I could see the tension between them. Frank wanted his boy to be tough, to carry on the family ways. Michael seemed more interested in books than guns. It reminded me of my own relationship with my father, before he died in a mine accident when I was 16. There's different ways to be tough, I said quietly. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when not to fight. Frank looked at me funny, but he didn't argue. As the night went on, I found myself watching both of them more carefully. Frank kept checking his rifle, cleaning it over and over, even though it was already spotless. His hands shook a little when he thought nobody was looking. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in the mirror plenty of times. He had the same haunted expression I'd had after the crash. "You okay, Frank?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Yeah, sure, I've been having some trouble sleeping lately. Bad dreams." "What kind of dreams?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Cars crashing, buildings falling down, people screaming." He shook his head. "Doctor says it's stress from work. I manage a factory back in Pittsburgh. Lot of pressure." Michael was listening now. "Dad's been having those dreams for weeks. Mom's worried about him." Something cold crawled up my spine. Dreams about disasters weren't something you heard about every day. Especially not out here, where my grandmother used to say the mountains had their own way of warning people about bad things coming. "What about you, Michael?" I asked. "You sleeping okay?" The kid looked uncomfortable. "I've been having weird dreams too, but they're different from Dad's." "How different?" "I see things, flying things with big red eyes, and I hear this voice telling me about terrible things that are going to happen." He looked embarrassed. "I know it sounds crazy. It didn't sound crazy to me. It sounded terrifying." I got up and checked the locks on the door and windows, trying to look casual about it. In my backpack, hidden under some spare clothes, I had my old service pistol, a .45 caliber that had saved my life more than once. I also had the combat knife I'd carried in Grenada. I hoped I wouldn't need either one, but something told me I might. "You know," I said, sitting back down, "my grandmother grew up in these mountains. She used to tell stories about strange things in the woods, things that showed up when bad stuff was about to happen." "What kind of things?" Michael asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "She called them harbingers, said they fed on fear and sadness. She told me about one in particular, a giant bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. Said it appeared before the mine disaster that killed dozens of men back in the 1920s. Frank laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Becca, you don't believe in that stuff, do you?" "I didn't used to," I said. "But after what I've seen in war, and now with these dreams you're both having..." I shrugged. "Maybe there's more to this world than we understand." The fire crackled and popped, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the wind was picking up, making the cabin creak and groan. Those red lights were still pulsing in the distance, and every time I caught a glimpse of them through the frost-covered windows, my stomach tightened. Frank got up and looked out the window. "What do you think those lights are, anyway?" "I don't know," I said. "But they weren't there this morning." Michael joined his father at the window. "They're getting brighter," he said softly. He was right. The red lights were definitely brighter than they'd been when we first arrived, and they seemed to be moving slowly but steadily in our direction. I felt responsible for these two. Frank might be older than me, but he was dealing with whatever trauma was giving him nightmares, and Michael was just a kid, scared and far from home. If something happened to them out here, it would be my fault. "Maybe we should head back to town in the morning," I suggested. "Weather's getting weird, and hunting doesn't look too promising anyway." Frank shook his head. "We just got here. Besides, Michael needs to learn that you don't run away just because things get a little strange." But this wasn't just a little strange. This was something else entirely. And every instinct I'd developed in the army was telling me we were walking into a trap. I just didn't know yet what was setting it. I woke up around 5 in the morning to the sound of Michael screaming. He was sitting up in his sleeping bag, eyes wide with terror, sweat pouring down his face, even though the cabin was freezing cold. Frank was already up, trying to shake his son awake. Michael! Michael, wake up! Frank was saying. It's just a dream! The kid's eyes snapped open, and he looked around wildly. Did you see it? Did you see the bird? There's no bird, son. You were dreaming. But Michael kept looking at the ceiling like something was up there. It was huge, Dad. Bigger than anything I've ever seen, and its eyes... He shivered. Its eyes were like fire. I got up and checked outside. The red lights were still there, but now they seemed to be in a pattern, pulsing on and off in a rhythm that almost seemed like Morse code. But if it was a message, I couldn't understand what it was trying to say. Maybe we should try the radio again, I said. See if we can get some news about what's happening. I turned on the battery radio and slowly moved the dial. Most stations were just static, but I found one emergency broadcast that was coming through. Clear. Unusual atmospheric conditions continue across West Virginia and surrounding areas. Citizens are advised to stay indoors if possible. Multiple reports of equipment failures and communication disruptions. Weather Service cannot explain the sudden temperature changes or the lights being reported in rural areas. The broadcast cut to static after that. Well, that's comforting, Frank said, but his voice was shaky. After breakfast, we decided to walk around the area and see if we could find any sign of deer or other animals. But what we found instead made my blood run cold. Michael spotted them first. Hey, what's wrong with these birds? Near a small clearing about 50 yards from the cabin, we found dozens of dead birds scattered on the ground. Crows, mostly, but also some hawks and smaller songbirds. They were just lying there like they'd fallen out of the sky. I knelt down and looked at one of the crows. There was no sign of injury, no blood, nothing that would explain why it was dead. Its eyes were still open, staring up at nothing. What do you think killed them? Michael asked. I don't know, I said. Disease, maybe, or poison, but I'd never seen anything like it. The birds looked like they'd just stopped, like something had turned off a switch in their brains. Frank was getting more agitated by the minute. He kept rubbing his head and complaining about the ringing in his ears. It's like there's a high-pitched noise that won't stop, he said. Can't you hear it? Michael and I listened, but we couldn't hear anything unusual. As we walked back toward the cabin, I noticed my compass was acting strange. The needle was spinning around and around, never settling on any direction. I pulled out my GPS unit, but according to the display, we were somehow underwater in the middle of a lake that didn't exist. Our equipment's going haywire, I told them. Compass is spinning. GPS thinks we're drowning. How are we supposed to find our way out of here if our equipment doesn't work? Michael asked. He was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the fear in his voice. I know these woods, I said. We'll be fine. But honestly, I wasn't so sure anymore. The weather kept getting weirder too. In the space of about 10 minutes, the temperature dropped from almost warm to bitter cold. We could see our breath, and ice was forming on the trees around us. In October, in weather that had been like summer just hours before. When we got back to the cabin, Frank tried to call his wife on his cell phone, but he couldn't get any signal. None of us could. It's like we're cut off from the whole world, Michael said. That afternoon, I was checking our supplies when Michael came running up to the cabin, his face white as a sheet. You have to see this, he said. There are tracks out there, but they just stop. He led us to a muddy patch near the stream. Sure, enough. There were deer tracks leading up to the edge of the clearing, but they didn't continue on the other side. They just ended, like the deer had vanished into thin air, right in the middle of taking a step. We found more tracks like that, rabbits, squirrels, even what looked like bear tracks. All of them ending suddenly in the middle of open ground. Where did they go? Frank asked. Nobody had an answer for that. That evening, we heard dogs howling in the distance, not just one or two, but dozens of them. It was the sound of animals in pure terror, and it went on for almost an hour before finally stopping. Those are the hunting dogs from the other camps, I said. They're running away from something. Running away from what? Michael asked. I looked out at those pulsing red lights, which were definitely closer now, close enough that I could make out what looked like a shape moving between them. I don't know, I said, but I think we're about to find out. Frank was cleaning his rifle again, his hands shaking worse than before. The ringing in his ears was getting louder, he said, and he was having trouble concentrating. Michael had stopped talking much. He just sat by the window drawing pictures in a notebook. When I looked over his shoulder, I saw he was drawing buildings falling down, cars crashing, people running and screaming. Where do these pictures come from? I asked him. He looked up at me with scared, confused eyes. I don't know. I just see them in my head, and I have to draw them. As night fell, the shadows outside started moving in ways that didn't make sense. Even when there were no clouds in the sky to cast them, dark shapes would slide across the ground, like something huge was flying overhead. I made sure my pistol was loaded and kept my knife close. Whatever was coming for us, I was going to be ready. But deep down, I had a feeling that bullets and knives weren't going to be enough. It was just after midnight when we saw it for the first time. I was sitting by the window, keeping watch, when Michael grabbed my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing up at the moon. At first, I thought it was just a cloud passing over, but then I realized the shadow was moving against the wind, and it had a shape. The shape of something with massive wings spread wide. The wingspan had to be at least 20 feet across, maybe more. It flew slowly, like it wasn't in any hurry, like it owned the sky and everything beneath it. "What is that?" "A thing," Frank whispered. He was standing behind us now, staring up through the window. As we watched, the creature turned in our direction. That's when we saw the eyes. Two burning red lights, brighter than car headlights, staring down at us from the darkness. The moment those eyes fixed on our cabin, all three of us were hit with the worst headache I'd ever felt. It was like someone was driving nails into my skull. Michael cried out and grabbed his head. Frank stumbled backward, blood starting to drip from his nose. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain. It was what happened inside our minds. Suddenly, I could feel the creature's thoughts mixing with my own. Not words exactly, but images and feelings that weren't mine. I saw cities burning, bridges collapsing, people dying in ways too terrible to describe. And underneath it all was this cold, hungry feeling, like the creature fed on human suffering. "Make it stop," Michael was saying over and over. "Please make it stop." The thing circled our cabin 3 times, those red eyes never looking away from us. Then it landed on a tall pine tree about 100 yards away. Even in the darkness, we could see its outline, huge and dark and wrong. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now. Pack everything and we're getting out of here." But Frank shook his head. "No way. I'm not running from some overgrown bird." "Frank, that's not a bird. That's something else entirely." "Look at the size of it," he said, and there was something strange in his voice now, something excited and hungry. "Do you know what kind of trophy that would make? Nobody's ever shot anything like that before." I stared at him. "Are you crazy? That thing nearly killed us just by looking at us." "It's just trying to scare us away," Frank said. He was already loading his rifle. "But I've been hunting for 30 years. I know when an animal is bluffing." Michael was still holding his head, rocking back and forth. "Dad, please, let's just go home, please." "Your mother was right about you," Frank snapped at his son. "No backbone at all." That wasn't like Frank. He loved his boy, but something in his voice had changed. It was harder, meaner, like the creature's presence was bringing out the worst in him. Over the next hour, things got worse fast. Michael started talking in a voice that didn't sound like his own. He would sit quietly for a few minutes, then suddenly start describing terrible accidents that he said were going to happen. A school bus crash that would kill 12 children, a factory explosion that would level 3 city blocks, a bridge collapse during rush hour. The details were so specific and horrible that I had to tell him to stop. "I can't stop," he said, tears streaming down his face. It's making me see these things. It wants me to know what's coming. Frank, meanwhile, was becoming obsessed with hunting the creature. He kept checking his rifle, counting his bullets, talking about the best way to bring down something that big. "Frank, listen to me," I said. "That thing is messing with your head. You need to fight it." "Nothing's messing with my head," he said. "I'm thinking clearer than I have in years. That thing out there killed all those birds, drove away all the animals. It's a predator, and predators need to be stopped." But when I looked in his eyes, I could see something else looking back at me. Something that wasn't Frank. The creature stayed in that tree all night, just watching us. Every time one of us looked toward it, the headaches would start again. And slowly, I started to understand what it was doing. It wasn't just hunting us, it was playing with us, turning us against each other, making us afraid and angry and desperate. The thing fed on those feelings. I could sense it somehow, like a cold presence in the back of my mind. Every time we felt fear or anger or hopelessness, it got a little stronger. Michael's visions were getting worse too. He started drawing pictures of our cabin with the roof torn off, pictures of Frank pointing his rifle at something, pictures of me covered in blood. "Why are you drawing these things?" I asked him. "Because they're going to happen," he said in that flat, empty voice. It showed me. Tomorrow night, everything's going to change. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static. I tried my cell phone, but there was still no signal. We were completely cut off from the outside world. As the night wore on, I realized that the creature wasn't just affecting Frank and Michael. It was getting to me too. I started having thoughts that weren't my own, violent thoughts about hurting the people I was supposed to protect. Part of me wanted to take my pistol and shoot both Frank and Michael before they could hurt me first. Another part of me wanted to walk outside and let the creature take me, just to make the mental pressure stop. But I fought those thoughts. I'd been through hell in the army, and I knew how to keep my mind focused when everything was falling apart. The problem was, I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. Just before dawn, the creature finally flew away. The mental pressure lifted, and we could all think clearly again. But the damage was already done. Frank was still obsessed with hunting it. Michael was still having visions of disaster, and I was starting to realize that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't going to let us leave. It had chosen us for something, and I had a terrible feeling that we were going to find out what that something was very soon. The next day started out quiet, but I could feel the storm building. Frank hadn't slept at all. He just sat by the window with his rifle, waiting for the creature to come back. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You should get some rest," I told him. "Can't rest," he said. "It might come back while I'm sleeping, and when it does, I'll be ready." Michael was drawing again. More pictures of terrible things, buildings on fire, people screaming, cars twisted into metal balls. But now he was also drawing pictures of his father. In every picture, Frank looked angry and dangerous. "Michael," I said quietly, "what do you see happening with your dad?" The kid looked up at me with scared eyes. "He's not my dad anymore," he whispered. "Something else is inside him. And now, something that wants to hurt people." I'd been thinking the same thing. The Frank I'd met 2 days ago was a good man who loved his son. This Frank was different, harder, meaner. Like that thing in the sky had reached into his brain and twisted. Something important. Around noon, Frank started talking to himself. Quiet at first, then louder. "It thinks it's so smart," he was saying, "flying around scaring people, but it's just an animal. Animals can be killed." "Frank," I said, "maybe you should put the gun down for a while." He turned to look at me, and for a second, I didn't recognize the person staring back. "Why?" "So it can pick us off one by one. So it can take my son like it took all those animals." "Nobody's taking anybody," I said. "We're going to stick together and get through this." But Frank laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You don't get it, do you? It's not going to let us leave. The only way out is to kill it first." That's when I noticed he was pointing his rifle at Michael. "Frank, what are you doing?" "Look at him," Frank said. "Really look at him. Drawing those pictures, talking about disasters that haven't happened yet. That thing did something to him, made him into one of its servants." Michael pressed himself against the wall. "Dad, it's me. It's Michael. I'm your son." "My son wouldn't know about plane crashes and building collapses," Frank said. His finger was on the trigger now. "My son wouldn't be able to see the future. That thing put something evil inside you. I could see what was happening." The creature had planted thoughts in Frank's head, made him paranoid and violent. In his twisted mind, he thought he was protecting himself and me by killing his own child. "Frank, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That's not evil inside Michael. That's fear. He's scared just like we all are." "Scared kids don't draw pictures of death," Frank said. "Scared kids don't predict disasters. He's been changed, Rebecca. He's not human anymore." Michael started crying. "Dad, please, I'm still me. I'm still your son." But Frank's finger was tightening on the trigger. I knew I had about 2 seconds to act. Frank was a good shot, and at this range, he wouldn't miss. If I didn't do something right now, Michael was going to die. I lunged forward just as Frank pulled the trigger. The bullet went past Michael's head, so close it burned his ear. Frank tried to swing the rifle toward me, but I was already on him. We crashed to the floor, fighting for control of the gun. Frank was strong, but I had military training. I got the rifle away from him and threw it across the room. But Frank wasn't done fighting. He came at me with his bare hands, his face twisted with rage. "You're working with it," he screamed. "You're all working with it." I didn't want to hurt him. Frank was a good man who'd been broken by something terrible, but he was trying to kill his own son, and I couldn't let that happen. When he charged at me again, I pulled out my combat knife. "Frank, stop," I said. "Don't make me do this." But he didn't stop. He grabbed for the knife, trying to take it away from me. In the struggle, the blade went into his chest. Frank looked down at the knife handle sticking out of his shirt. His eyes cleared. For just a moment, and I saw the real Frank looking back at me, confused and scared. "What happened to me?" he whispered. Then he fell down and didn't get up again. Michael was screaming. Not words, just pure terror and grief. His father was dead, and I was the one who'd killed him. I knelt down next to Frank and checked for a pulse. But I already knew there wouldn't be one. The knife had gone straight into his heart. "I'm sorry," I said to Michael. "I'm so sorry." "But he was going to kill you." Michael just kept screaming. Outside, I could hear something moving around the cabin. Big, heavy footsteps that didn't sound like any animal I knew. And underneath the footsteps, a sound like giant wings flapping. The creature was back. And somehow, I knew it was pleased with what had just happened. It had wanted us to turn on each other. It had fed Frank's paranoia until he became a killer. And now it had what it wanted: fear, death, and suffering. But it wasn't done with us yet. I could feel its presence pressing against my mind again, trying to plant new thoughts. Thoughts about how Michael wasn't really safe, about how he might turn violent too, about how I should protect myself by... "No," I said out loud. "I won't let you do this to me." I grabbed my pistol and checked the clip. 6 bullets. I didn't. You'd know if they would stop the creature, but I was going to find out. Michael had stopped screaming and was just staring at his father's body. "It made him do it, didn't it?" he said quietly. "That thing made him try to kill me." "Yeah," I said. It did, and now it's going to make you try to kill me too." I looked at the boy, really looked at him. He was 17 years old, scared out of his mind, and he'd just watched his father die, but there was something else in his eyes now. Something that looked almost like acceptance. "That's not going to happen," I said. But even as I said it, I could feel the creature's influence growing stronger, and I realized that maybe Michael was right. Maybe it was going to make me try to kill him too. The footsteps outside were getting closer. The roof exploded inward like it was made of paper. Chunks of wood and metal crashed down around us as something massive landed on top of the cabin. The whole building shook and creaked, ready to fall down at any second. Through the hole in the roof, I could see it clearly for the first time. The creature was even bigger than I'd thought. Its body was the size of a small car, covered in dark feathers that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The wings were folded now, but I could see they were easily 20 feet across, maybe more, but it was the eyes that made my blood freeze. Two burning red coals staring down at us with an intelligence that was old and hungry and completely alien. Michael was pressed against the wall, staring up at the thing in pure terror. "It's here," he whispered, "just like in my dreams." I raised my pistol and fired 3 shots at the creature's chest. The bullets hit it. I saw them hit, but they passed right through like it was made of smoke. The creature didn't even flinch. It dropped down through the hole in the roof, landing on the cabin floor with a sound like thunder. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its claws were as long as my forearm and looked sharp enough to cut through steel. But the worst part was what it did to our minds just by being near us. The headache came back, worse than before. It felt like my skull was going to crack open. But along with the pain came something else, visions that weren't my own. I saw cities burning while people ran screaming through the streets. I saw bridges collapsing into rivers full of cars and bodies. I saw schools and hospitals and churches all reduced to rubble, while something with red eyes watched from the sky. And I understood. This creature didn't just predict disasters, it caused them. It fed on human suffering, and it had been doing it for centuries. "Please," Michael said to the creature, "please don't hurt us. We didn't do anything wrong." The thing turned its burning gaze toward the boy, and I saw something that made my heart sink. It wasn't interested in me at all. It had come for Michael. Suddenly, I understood why Michael had been having the visions. The creature had been marking him, choosing him, preparing him for this moment. "No," I said, stepping between the creature and the boy. "You can't have him." The Mothman looked at me then, and I felt its thoughts pressing into my mind. Not words, but feelings and images that told me what it wanted. It needed someone young, someone whose mind was still flexible enough to be shaped, someone who could see the future disasters it planned to cause, someone who could be its prophet, spreading fear and despair wherever they went. It had tried to use Frank to eliminate me, to clear the way. But that had failed, so now it would take what it wanted by force. The creature reached out with one massive claw toward Michael. I fired the rest of my bullets at it. They passed through harmlessly, but the sound made the creature pause for a moment. That was all the time I had. I lunged forward with my knife, trying to stab the thing in what I thought might be its heart. But the blade went right through it, just like the bullets had. The creature's claw swept across my chest, opening 3 long gashes that went down to the bone. I fell backward, blood pouring from the wounds. "Rebecca!" Michael screamed. I tried to get back up, but I was losing too much blood too fast. The room was starting to spin, and I could feel myself getting weaker. The Mothman reached for Michael again. The boy tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature's claws closed around his arms, lifting him off the ground. "Let me go!" Michael shouted, kicking and struggling. "Let me go!" But the creature's grip was like steel. It carried the boy toward the hole in the roof, getting ready to fly away with him. That's when I realized something. The creature might be like smoke when it came to bullets and knives, but it was solid enough to grab Michael, which meant it had to make itself solid to interact with our world. I still had one weapon left. With the last of my strength, I grabbed a burning piece of wood from the fireplace and threw it at the creature's wing. The fire hit the Mothman's feathers, and they caught immediately, burning with a blue flame that lit up the whole cabin. The creature let out a shriek that sounded like metal tearing, and it dropped Michael. But instead of falling to the ground, Michael was somehow pulled upward, caught in the creature's grip again as it rose through the hole in the roof. Rebecca! He screamed as the burning creature carried him up into the night sky. "Help me!" I tried to get up, tried to follow them outside, but I couldn't move. Too much blood lost, too much damage done. All I could do was lie there and watch through the hole in the roof as the creature flew away with Michael. His screams echoed across the mountains for a long time before they finally faded into silence. I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I managed to stop the bleeding and make it to the road where a passing truck found me 2 days later. The driver took me to a hospital where I spent 3 weeks recovering from my injuries. The police searched for Michael, but they never found him, or Frank's body for that matter. When they went back to the cabin, all they found were burn marks and some blood on the floor. No bodies, no signs of struggle, nothing that would explain what had happened. They said I was in shock from being lost in the woods, that I'd made up the whole story to deal with the trauma of losing my clients in some kind of accident. But I know what I saw. I know what took Michael Kowalski that night. That was 37 years ago, and I've been having the nightmares ever since. Dreams about disasters that are going to happen. Plane crashes, building collapses, natural disasters. I see them all before they occur. I've tried to warn people, but nobody believes me. They think I'm just a crazy old veteran lady who's lost her mind. So I stopped trying to convince them and just started moving away from places before the disasters hit. It doesn't help. The guilt follows me everywhere. Every October, those red lights appear in the West Virginia sky again, and whenever they do, someone goes missing. Usually a young person, someone whose mind can still be shaped and twisted. I think Michael is still out there somewhere, changed into something that serves the creature. I think he's the one choosing the victims now, helping the Mothman find new prophets to spread its message of fear and doom. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear his voice on the wind. Still 17 years old, still scared, still calling for help that will never come. The Mothman is patient. It's been here longer than our cities, longer than our civilization. It feeds on disaster and despair, and as long as there are humans to suffer, it will never go hungry. And somewhere in the darkness, it's still watching, still waiting, still choosing its next victim. If you ever see red lights pulsing in the night sky, don't investigate. Don't try to be brave. Just run, and keep running until you can't see them anymore. Because once the Mothman notices you, it never lets go. My name is Rebecca Sullivan, and this is my warning to anyone who will listen. Some shadows are too dark to face alone, and some monsters are too hungry to ever be satisfied. My name is Samuel Hendricks, but everyone calls me Sam. I'm 44 years old, and I live alone by Bear Lake in Wyoming. Well, not completely alone. I have my dog Scout with me. He's a German Shepherd who saved my life in more ways than one. Let me tell you how I ended up here, because it matters for what happened next. I used to be a smoke jumper. That means I jumped out of planes to fight forest fires in places too dangerous for regular firefighters. It was the best job in the world until everything went wrong. 3 years ago, my parachute got tangled in some trees during a jump in Colorado. I fell hard and shattered my left leg. The doctors fixed it, but it never worked the same way again. That accident wasn't even the worst part. While I was stuck in that hospital bed, 3 of my best friends died in a wildfire I should have seen coming. If I hadn't been hurt, I would have been there with them. Maybe I could have saved them. Maybe we all would have died together. I don't know which would have been better. My wife Sarah couldn't handle seeing me blame myself every day. She said I was destroying myself with guilt, and she was probably right. She left while I was still using crutches. Can't say I blame her for that either. That's when my grandfather's cabin became my escape. He left it to me when he died, sitting Right here on the north shore of Bear Lake. It's not easy to reach. You need a snowmobile in winter, or you have to hike a dangerous mountain trail that's killed plenty of people over the years. Perfect for someone who wants to disappear from the world. Bear Lake is beautiful, I'll give it that. It sits between tall mountains with snow on their peaks all year round. In autumn, the aspen trees turn bright gold, and their reflection in the water looks like liquid sunshine. On calm days, the lake is so still it looks like a giant mirror. I've been living here for 2 years now. Scout showed up about 6 months after I arrived, just a skinny, scared dog who looked as broken as I felt. We understood each other right away. He stayed, and I was glad for the company. We make a good team. I know how to fish and trap animals. For food, thanks to my grandfather teaching me when I was young. Scout is great at warning me when bears or mountain lions come around. The nearest neighbor is 40 miles away through wilderness that doesn't forgive mistakes, so we have to take care of ourselves. My grandmother always told me stories about this lake. She was part Shoshone, and her people had legends about water, spirits that lived in deep lakes like this one, hungry spirits that wanted to steal human souls. I never believed those stories when I was a kid, but living here alone makes you think about things differently. The lake has always been my safe place. When my leg hurts too much or when I dream about my dead friends, I come sit by the water. It calms me down. At least it used to. This story starts in late October 1994. Winter was coming early that year. The weather reports kept warning about the worst storm in decades heading our way. The temperature had dropped to 20 below zero, cold enough to freeze the lake solid. But something was wrong. Parts of the lake should have been covered in thick ice by then, but patches of dark water stayed open. I could see strange, warm currents moving under the surface, keeping the water from freezing like it should. That didn't make sense, but lots of things in nature don't make sense until you understand them better. I was checking my ice fishing lines. One last time before the big storm hit. My radio was crackling with warnings about the blizzard coming from the northwest. I should have been getting ready to leave, maybe head to town until it passed. My snowmobile was gassed up and ready to go, but something made me want to stay. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was something else calling to me from the dark water. I should have listened to Scout. He'd been acting strange around the lake for weeks, whimpering whenever waves touched the shore. Dogs know things we don't, and I should have paid attention. That's when I first noticed the ripples on the water's surface. Perfect circles spreading out in patterns that looked too regular to be natural. Like something big was moving deep underneath. Something that knew I was watching. The first really strange thing happened 3 days before the big storm was supposed to hit. I woke up in the middle of the night because Scout was whining. Not his usual warning bark when he heard a bear or coyote outside. This was different, a scared, worried sound that made my skin crawl. I looked at my watch. 2 in the morning. I got up and walked to the window that faces the lake. What I saw made no sense at all. The water was glowing, not bright like a flashlight, but soft and blue-green, like the glow sticks kids use on Halloween. The light was coming from deep under the water, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. Pulse, pause, pulse, pause. It reminded me of those nature shows where they film deep sea creatures that make their own light. But this was a mountain lake in Wyoming, not the ocean. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was dreaming. But the glow was still there. Scout pressed against my leg, shaking. His fur was standing up all along his back, the way it does when he's really scared. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, scratching behind his ears. "What do you see out there?" The glowing lasted about 10 minutes, then slowly faded away. I stood at that window for another hour, but it didn't come back. When I finally went back to bed, I kept thinking about my grandmother's stories. Water spirits, she used to say, hungry things that lived in the deep places. I told myself it was probably some kind of fish. Maybe a school of them had gotten trapped when the lake started to freeze. Fish do weird things when they're stressed. but I knew it wasn't fish. The next morning I went to check my fishing lines like always. That's when I found the second strange thing. All three of my lines were tangled up in knots, not regular knots, that happen when fish fight on the line. These were complicated, twisted patterns that looked almost like rope work. The kind of knots you'd need 2 hands and a lot of time to make. I've been fishing these waters for 2 years. My lines have never gotten tangled like that, not once. And there's no current strong enough in this lake to twist them into patterns. Like that, I spent an hour untangling them, and the whole time I felt like something was watching me from the water. Every few minutes I'd look up, expecting to see ripples or bubbles or something. But the lake surface was perfectly calm, too calm. That afternoon, Scout had his first seizure. We were walking along the shore, checking my trap line for rabbits. Scout always loved these walks. He'd run ahead, sniff around, chase squirrels up trees. Normal dog stuff that made me smile even on bad days. But when we got about 10 feet from the water's edge, Scout just stopped. His whole body went stiff, and his eyes rolled back until I could only see the whites. Then he started shaking all over, his legs jerking like he was being shocked. I dropped to my knees beside him. "Scout! Scout! What's wrong?" The seizure only lasted about 30 seconds, but it felt like forever. When it stopped, Scout looked around confused, like he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the lake and started backing away, whimpering. I carried him back to the cabin and called the emergency vet in town on my radio. She said seizures could be caused by lots of things, old injuries, poison, even stress. But Scout had never had problems before, and he sure hadn't eaten anything bad. "Bring him in when the storm passes," she said. "Keep him warm and watch for more episodes." That night, I took my water thermometer down to the lake. I wanted to understand why parts of it weren't freezing. The air temperature was 15 below zero. The water should have been just above freezing, maybe 33 degrees. My thermometer read 47 degrees in one spot, 62 degrees in another. One area near the deepest part of the lake was 78 degrees, warmer than a bathtub. That was impossible. There's no hot spring feeding into Bear Lake. I've lived here long enough to know every inlet and outlet. The water comes from snowmelt and a few small streams, nothing that could heat the lake like that. I tested the thermometer in a bucket of snow. It worked fine. 32 degrees, just like it should be. So why was the lake water so warm in patches? I was walking back to the cabin when I noticed my boots were wet. Not just damp from snow, soaking wet like I'd been standing in water. But I hadn't gone near the shoreline. I'd stayed on the dock the whole time, and the dock was 3 feet above the water level. I checked my footprints in the snow. They led straight from the cabin to the dock and back. No detours, no side trips to the water's edge. So how did my boots get soaked? That's when I found the fourth strange thing. My compass was spinning. I always carry a compass when I'm outside, old habit from my smoke jumper days. But when I took it out to check our direction back to the cabin, the needle was spinning in slow circles instead of pointing north. Round and round, like it couldn't decide which way to point. I shook it, thinking maybe it was broken. But as soon as I walked away from the lake, the needle settled down and pointed north just fine. When I walked back toward the water, it started spinning again. Something in that lake was messing with magnetic fields. Something big enough and powerful enough to confuse a compass from 30 feet away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept thinking about those glowing lights under the water, about my fishing lines tied in impossible knots, about Scout's seizure and my soaking wet boots. Around midnight, I heard something that made my blood turn cold. Waves, big waves, lapping against my dock and the shoreline. But there was no wind. The air was perfectly still, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. There was nothing that should have been making waves in the lake. I crept to the window and looked out. The water was moving like something huge was swimming just under the surface. The waves were rolling out in all directions from the deepest part of the lake, getting bigger as they spread. And in the moonlight I could see the water, moving in those same strange patterns I'd noticed before. Perfect geometric shapes that looked too organized to be natural, like something down there was making them on purpose. Scout was hiding under my bed, shaking. He wouldn't come out, no matter how much I coaxed him. I stood at that window for 2 hours, watching those impossible waves roll across the lake, watching those hypnotic patterns in the water that seemed to pull at my eyes, making it hard to look away. That's when I knew for sure that something was living in Bear Lake. Something that didn't belong there, something that was getting bolder, and tomorrow the storm would trap us here with it. The storm hit just after sunrise. I woke up to the sound of wind howling around the cabin like a pack of wolves. Snow was blowing so hard I couldn't see 10 feet. Past my windows, the weather radio crackled with emergency warnings, roads closed, travel impossible, temperatures dropping to 40 below with the wind chill. We were stuck. Scout wouldn't eat his breakfast. He just sat in the corner farthest from the lake, staring at the wall. Every few minutes he'd whimper or let out a low growl at nothing I could see. I tried to keep busy, checked the wood stove, organized my supplies, cleaned my rifle. Normal. Things to keep my mind off the weird stuff that had been happening. But every time I looked out the window toward the lake, I felt like something was looking back. The storm was so thick I couldn't see the water, but I knew it was there. Waiting. Around. Then the wind died down for a few minutes. Just long enough for me to see something that made my heart stop. The lake wasn't frozen. It should have been solid ice by now, especially with this storm. But through the blowing snow, I could see dark water moving. Big, slow waves rolling across. The surface, like something massive, was stirring underneath. That's when I saw it. A shadow under the water, long and dark, moving in curves like a giant snake. It had to be at least 60 feet long, maybe more. I couldn't tell how wide it was, but it was big enough to make those waves I'd been seeing. I rubbed my eyes, thinking the storm was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, the shadow was still there, moving in slow, lazy circles near the deepest part of the lake. "Scout," I called softly. "Scout, come here." But Scout was having another seizure. His whole body was shaking and his eyes had rolled back again. This one lasted longer than the first, almost a full minute of him jerking and twitching on the floor. When it stopped, he looked at me with the most scared expression I've ever seen on a dog. Then he crawled under the kitchen table and wouldn't come out. That's when I heard it, a voice in my head, not my own voice, something else, speaking without words. It felt like someone was whispering directly into my brain. "Come to the water," it said. "Come to me." I shook my head hard, trying to clear it. Stress can make you hear things that aren't there. Being alone for too long can mess with your mind. That's all this was. But the voice came again, stronger this time. "You're in pain," it whispered. "I can make it stop. All you have to do is walk to the water." My left leg started throbbing, the one I'd broken in the accident. The pain was worse than it had been in months, shooting up from my ankle to my hip. I limped to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. The water looked warm, inviting. I could almost feel how good it would be to step into that dark, heated lake. The voice was right. The water would make the pain go away. I found myself putting on my boots. That's when Scout started, barking. Not his warning bark. This was desperate panic barking, like he was trying to save my life. He crawled out from under the table and grabbed my pant leg with his teeth, pulling me away from the door. The spell broke. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. What the hell had I been thinking? Walking into a lake during a blizzard would kill me in minutes. The water might be warmer than it should be, but it was still cold enough to stop my heart. I sat down hard on the floor, shaking. Scout pressed against me, whining softly. "Good boy," I whispered, scratching his ears. "Good boy, you saved me." But I knew whatever was in that lake wasn't done with me yet. The voice in my head got stronger as the day went on. Sometimes it sounded like my dead friends calling for help. Sometimes it sounded like my ex-wife Sarah telling me she was sorry and wanted to come back. Sometimes it sounded like my grandfather asking me to join him in the water. Each time I felt that pull toward the lake. Each time Scout would bark or whine or do something to snap me out of it. By evening I was exhausted from fighting the voice. My head felt fuzzy, like I was sick with a fever. I kept losing time. I'd be sitting at the kitchen table, then suddenly find myself standing at the window, staring at the water. That's when I realized what was happening. The thing in the lake was getting inside my head, reading my thoughts, learning what would make me come to it willingly. It knew about my guilt over my friends' deaths. It knew about my broken marriage and my damaged leg. It was using all of that against me. Around midnight, the storm finally stopped. The sudden quiet woke me up. I'd fallen asleep in my chair by the wood stove. Scout was pressed against my legs, still on guard. I looked out the window and saw something that made my blood turn to ice. The lake was perfectly calm. Not a single ripple on the surface, like it was made of black glass. But I could see shapes moving underneath, long, curved shapes that were definitely not fish, and the water was glowing again. Brighter this time, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. The light was coming from something big, something that filled almost the entire deep end of the lake. As I watched, the surface of the water began to move in those geometric patterns again. Perfect circles and spirals that seemed to pull at my eyes. The longer I stared, the harder it became to look away. The patterns were beautiful, hypnotic. They made me feel calm and peaceful for the first time in years. All my worries and guilt seemed to fade away as I watched those perfect shapes dance on the water's surface. "Come," the voice whispered. "It's time." I stood up, my body moving without my permission. My legs carried me toward the door, and my hands reached for the handle. The patterns on the water were calling to me, promising peace and an end to all my pain. Scout threw himself at me, knocking me away from the door. He grabbed my arm with his teeth, not biting, but holding on tight enough to hurt. The sharp pain broke the spell again. I fell to my knees, gasping like I'd been underwater. My heart was racing and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely pet Scout. "Thank you," I whispered to him. "Thank you for not letting me go." But as I sat there on the floor, I realized something terrible. The thing in the lake was learning, getting stronger. Each time it tried to control me, it got a little better at it. And each time Scout saved me, I could see the strain wearing on him too. He was exhausted from fighting something he didn't understand. How long could we keep this up? How long before the thing in the water finally won? I looked out the window one more time. The patterns on the surface had stopped, but I could still see that massive shadow moving in the depths, waiting, patient. It knew I was weakening. It knew that eventually Scout would get tired or I would let my guard down for just a moment too long. And when that happened, I would walk into that dark water, and I would never come back. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the voice calling to me from the lake. So I sat in my chair with my rifle across my lap, watching the windows, while Scout lay at my feet. The next morning brought a clear, cold day. The storm had passed, but the roads would still be blocked for days. No one was coming to help us. Tried to make coffee, but my hands were shaking so bad I spilled grounds all over the counter. When I looked in the mirror to shave, I barely recognized myself. My face was pale and thin, with dark circles under my eyes. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Scout wasn't doing much better. He hadn't eaten anything since the storm started, and he jumped at every little sound. Worse, he was having more seizures, 3 that morning alone, each one lasting longer than the last. I knew the thing in the lake was doing something to him. hurting him because he kept protecting me. Around noon, I made a mistake. I went outside to get more firewood from the pile near the cabin. I told myself I'd be quick, just grab an armload and get back inside. But when I stepped outside, the voice hit me like a punch to the gut. "Look at me," it whispered. I tried not to, but my head turned toward the lake anyway. The water was crystal clear in the bright sunlight, and I could see all the way to the bottom in the shallow parts. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It was a serpent, just like my grandmother's stories described, but bigger than anything that should exist. Its body was as thick as a truck, covered in dark scales that shifted color from black to deep green. The head was massive, with intelligent eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. And it was looking right at me. "You see me now," the voice said, and I could tell it was coming from that thing. "Good. We can talk properly." I wanted to run back to the cabin, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature's eyes held me frozen in place. "You're in so much pain," it continued. "The guilt eats at you every day, the loneliness, the way your leg aches when it's cold. I can take all of that away." Images flooded my mind. My 3 friends who died in the fire, but in these visions, they were alive and laughing. Sarah was there too, young and happy, like when we first met. Even my grandfather appeared, looking just like he did when I was a kid. "They're all here with me," the voice said. "In the water, waiting for you. All you have to do is come home." The images were so real, I could almost smell the campfire smoke from our old camping trips. I could hear my friends' voices calling my name. Sarah was reaching out her hand, smiling like she used to before everything went wrong. I took a step toward the water. That's when Scout came barreling out of the cabin. He hit me in the chest with his full weight, knocking me backward into the snow. The spell broke, and the beautiful images disappeared like smoke. The creature in the lake let out a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream. It was the sound of pure rage, so loud it made the windows of my cabin rattle. Scout was having the worst seizure yet. His whole body was thrashing in the snow, foam coming from his mouth. I scooped him up and ran for the cabin, slamming the door behind us. It took Scout almost 5 minutes to come out of it. When he finally did, he looked up at me with exhausted eyes, then crawled under the kitchen table again. That's when I realized the horrible truth. Every time Scout saved me, the thing in the lake hurt him more. It was trying to wear him down, make him too weak to protect me. And it was working. The attacks got worse as the day went on. The voice in my head became constant, whispering lies and promises. It showed me memories of good times, but twisted them so they all ended with me walking into the water. I tried everything I could think of to block it out. I put on my radio headphones and turned the music up loud. I recited old song lyrics and tried to do math problems in my head. Nothing worked for long. The creature was learning my thoughts, getting better at finding the cracks in my mind. Around dinner time, I caught myself standing at the kitchen sink, filling a pot with water. I didn't remember deciding to do it, but there I was, staring at the water, like it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "Just a taste," the voice whispered. "Just put your hands in. Feel how warm and safe it is." I was about to stick my hands in the pot when Scout barked once, a sharp, desperate sound. I dropped the pot and water splashed everywhere, but it wasn't regular water anymore. It was warm, and it glowed with that same blue-green light I'd seen in the lake. Somehow, the creature had gotten into my cabin's water supply. I grabbed Scout and backed away from the sink. The glowing water was spreading across the floor, moving toward us like it was alive. "No," I said out loud, my voice shaking. "You can't have us. We won't go." The glowing stopped, and the water faded back to normal. But I knew it had just been a test. The thing was showing me that nowhere was safe. It could reach us anywhere. That night was the worst yet. I couldn't trust anything. Not the water, not my own thoughts, not even my memories. The creature kept showing me visions of my friends and family, all calling for me to join them in the lake. Scout had 6 more seizures. Each one left him weaker and more confused. By midnight, he could barely lift his head. I knelt beside him, tears running down my face. "I'm sorry, boy," I whispered. "I'm so sorry this is happening to you." That's when the creature made its biggest mistake. It tried to copy Scout's voice in my head. "Let me go," it said, trying to sound like my dog. "Stop fighting. Let me rest." But I knew Scout would never give up on me, never. That fake voice just made me angry instead of sad. "You don't know him at all," I said to the lake through the window. "He's stronger than both of us." As if he heard me, Scout lifted his head and looked at me. His eyes were tired, but they were still determined, still fighting. We were both exhausted, scared, and running out of strength. But we weren't beaten yet. The creature in the lake had made one thing clear, though. It wasn't going to wait much longer. Tomorrow it would try something bigger, something we might not be able to fight. I had to find a way to stop it before it killed us both. I spent the rest of the night making a plan. The creature was getting stronger, and Scout was getting weaker. We couldn't keep playing defense forever. I had to attack it somehow. But how do you kill something that big living at the bottom of a lake? Then I remembered something my grandfather told me when I was young. He said the old Shoshone hunters had a saying, "When you can't reach your enemy, make your enemy come to you." I looked around the cabin thinking, what did I have that could hurt a 60-foot serpent? My rifle wouldn't do much against something that size. My hunting knife was a joke. But I had other things. I had a wood stove that burned hot enough to heat the whole cabin. I had 5 gallons of kerosene for my heater. I had propane tanks for my camp stove. And I had a cabin made of old dry wood that would burn like paper. If I couldn't go to the creature, maybe I could make it come to me. The plan was simple and probably stupid. I would make the creature angry enough to attack the cabin directly. When it came after me, I'd turn the whole place into a trap. A fire trap. It meant destroying the only home I had left. It meant risking both our lives on a plan that might not work. But doing nothing meant dying slowly as the creature picked us apart piece by piece. I started getting ready just before dawn. First, I poured kerosene all around the inside walls of the cabin. Not enough to start a fire by accident, but enough to make the place go up fast when I was ready. Then I opened the propane tanks and left them near the windows facing the lake. If they got hot enough, they'd explode and take half the cabin with them. Scout watched me work. He was too weak to stand up much, but I could tell he understood something big was about to happen. Every few minutes he'd look toward the lake and growl softly. "I know, boy," I told him. "We're going to end this today, one way or another." When everything was ready, I sat down by the window with my rifle and waited for the sun to come up. I didn't have to wait long for the creature to notice what I'd done. As soon as the first light hit the lake, I felt that familiar voice in my head. "What are you planning?" it asked. For the first time, it sounded worried. "Come and find out," I said out loud. That made it angry. The water started churning like it was boiling. Waves crashed against my dock hard enough to crack the wooden posts. The creature's shadow moved back and forth under the surface, fast and agitated. "You can't hurt me," it said. "I'm too big, too old, too strong." "Maybe," I said. "But you want something from me, don't you? You've been trying to get me into that. Water for days. So come get me." The attacks on my mind got worse. The creature showed me visions of the cabin burning with Scout and me trapped inside. It showed me my friends' bodies in the Colorado fire, burned beyond recognition. It tried to make me feel the pain of my broken leg all over again, but I was ready for it this time. Every time the vision started, I focused on the kerosene smell in the cabin. I thought about the plan, about what I had to do. The creature couldn't control thoughts I kept changing. "You're making a mistake," it warned. I was being gentle with you. I can be much worse. "Do your worst," I said. That's when the real attack began. The cabin started shaking like there was an earthquake. Water began seeping up through the floorboards. That same glowing, warm water I'd seen before. It spread across the floor in streams, reaching towards Scout and me like fingers. I picked up Scout and put him on the kitchen table, out of reach of the water. He was barely conscious, but he licked my hand to let me know he was still with me. The creature's shadow grew larger under the lake. I could see it clearly now, coiled up like a giant spring, getting ready to launch itself at my cabin. Last chance, the voice said. Come to me willingly and I'll make it quick. Fight me and I'll make you suffer before you die. I've been suffering for 3 years, I said. What's a little more? I lit a match. The creature exploded out of the lake like a missile. I'd never seen anything so big move so fast. 60 feet of serpent came crashing through the air, water streaming off. Its scales. Its head was the size of a car, with teeth like railroad spikes, and eyes that burned with hate. It hit the cabin like a wrecking ball. The whole front wall exploded inward. Wooden beams snapped like toothpicks. The creature's massive body filled. Half the cabin, its tail still thrashing in the lake outside. I dropped the match. The kerosene caught fire instantly. Flames raced along the walls and ceiling, turning my home into an oven. The heat hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't run. Not yet. The creature screamed, a sound that shattered every piece of glass in the cabin. It tried to pull back toward the lake, but it was stuck. Its body was too big for the hole it had made coming in. That's when Scout did something amazing. Even though he could barely move, he jumped off the table and bit down on the creature's neck. His teeth found a gap between the massive scales, and he held on tight. The creature thrashed harder, trying to shake him off, but Scout wouldn't let go. He was buying me time to get out. The propane tanks started heating up. I could hear them creaking and groaning as the pressure built inside them. Any second now, they'd explode. I grabbed Scout around the middle and pulled him away from the creature. He finally let go, his mouth bloody from where he'd bitten through those iron-hard scales. "Good boy," I gasped. "Now we run!" I threw Scout over my shoulder and headed for the back door. The cabin was completely on fire now, flames everywhere. The creature was still stuck in the front wall, screaming and thrashing as the fire burned. Its ancient flesh. We made it outside just as the propane tanks exploded. The blast knocked me flat and sent pieces of burning wood flying in all directions. The whole cabin went up like a bomb had hit it. Through the flames and smoke, I could see the creature writhing in agony as the fire consumed it, but we weren't safe yet. The explosion had freed the creature from the cabin wreckage. Badly burned and furious, it came sliding across the snow toward us, leaving a trail of melted ice and blood. I tried to run, but my bad leg gave out. I fell hard, and Scout tumbled out of my arms. The creature was only 20 feet away, its massive head weaving. Back and forth like a cobra getting ready to strike. "You think fire can kill me?" The voice in my head was weak, but still angry. I've lived for thousands of years. I've survived ice ages and floods, and Scout barked once, just once, but it was the loudest bark I'd ever heard from him. The creature stopped talking. Its burning eyes focused on my dog, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in them. Scout was standing between me and the monster. He was hurt and exhausted and probably dying, but he wasn't backing down. His fur was standing up, his teeth were bared, and he was ready to fight something 100 times his size. That's when I understood what my grandmother had meant about water spirits. They fed on fear and despair and loneliness. But Scout wasn't afraid. Even facing death, he was brave and loyal and full of love. The creature couldn't handle that. It had never encountered anything like Scout before. While it hesitated, confused by a courage it couldn't understand, I did the only thing could think of. I crawled to the edge of the lake and broke through the thin ice with my rifle butt. The water was still warm from the creature's body heat, but it was water, just water, not the glowing, hypnotic stuff it had been showing me. "No," the creature said, understanding what I was planning. "The lake is mine." "You can't." I rolled into the water. The cold hit me like a sledgehammer, but I kept moving. I went under the surface and opened my eyes. Even in the murky water, I could see the creature's massive body above me, outlined against the flames of my burning cabin. I swam underneath it and found what I was looking for, a section of its belly where Scout's teeth had torn through the scales. The wound was small, but it was bleeding. I pulled out my hunting knife and drove it into the wound as hard as I could. The creature's scream was so loud, it cracked the ice all around us. It thrashed wildly, trying to get away, but I held onto my knife and twisted it deeper. Black blood poured into the water. The creature's movements got weaker and more desperate. I could feel its life leaving it, flowing out through the wound I'd made. Please, the voice whispered in my head, weaker. Now, I just wanted companionship. I've been alone so long. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for it. But then I thought about what it had done to Scout, how it had tried to control us and hurt us. I twisted the knife one more time. The creature went still. I swam to the surface, gasping for air. The burning cabin lit up the whole lake, turning, the water orange and red. Pieces of the dead creature were already sinking toward the bottom. Scout was waiting for me at the shoreline, his tail wagging weakly. I crawled out of the lake and collapsed beside him in the snow. "We did it, boy," I whispered. "We actually did it." But as I lay there, getting colder by the minute, I realized we had a new problem. My cabin was gone. The temperature was dropping fast. And I was soaking wet in the middle of a Wyoming winter. We might have killed the monster, but we still might not survive the night. I don't remember much about the next few hours. The cold was so bad, it made thinking impossible. My wet clothes turned to ice against my skin. Scout and I huddled together in the snow, watching my cabin burn down to nothing. The fire kept us warm for a while, but fires don't last forever. When the flames finally died down, we were left in complete darkness, with the temperature dropping toward 40 below. I knew we had maybe an hour before the cold killed us both. That's when I remembered my snowmobile. It was parked in the small shed behind where the cabin used to be. If the shed had survived the explosion, and if the snowmobile still worked, we might have a chance. I crawled through the snow, dragging Scout with me. My hands were so numb I could barely feel them, but I managed to pull open the shed door. The snowmobile was there, covered in ash, but looking undamaged. "Please start," I thought, as I turned the key, "please." The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I've never been so happy to hear a sound in my life. I wrapped Scout in an old blanket from the shed and set him in front of me on the seat. Then we took off across the frozen lake, heading for the main trail that would take us to town. The ride took 3 hours through deep snow and bitter cold. By the time we reached the highway, I couldn't feel my hands or feet. A snowplow driver found us and called an ambulance. They said I was lucky to be alive. Severe frostbite on my hands and feet, but nothing that wouldn't heal with time. Scout was in worse shape. Exhaustion, dehydration, and some kind of brain trauma from all those seizures. The vet wasn't sure he'd make it, but he did. Scout's tougher than he looks. The hard part was explaining what happened. I told the sheriff that a gas leak had caused an explosion that destroyed my cabin. Not exactly a lie. There had been propane involved. I said Scout and I barely escaped with our lives. Nobody asked about the creature. How could they? Who would believe a story about a 60-foot serpent living in Bear Lake? The insurance company paid for the cabin without much trouble. Accidental explosions happen in remote places all the time. I used the money to buy a small house in town, as far from any large body of water as I could find. That was 6 months. Scout recovered mostly. He still has seizures sometimes, but not as bad as before. He won't go near water, though. Not even his drinking bowl if it's too full. The vet says it's trauma from whatever happened to him at the lake. If only she knew. As for me, well, I'm alive. That's something, I guess. But I'm not the same person I was before Bear Lake. The creature left marks on me that go deeper than frostbite scars. I can't take showers anymore. Even the sound of running water makes my heart race. When it rains, I have to close all the curtains and turn up the TV loud so I can't hear it hitting the windows. Swimming pools, rivers, even puddles in the street. They all make me remember those hypnotic patterns, those voices in my head trying to pull me down. The worst part is that sometimes late at night I still hear the creature calling to me. Not the same one. That thing is dead, burned to ash at the bottom of Bear Lake, but its voice echoes in my dreams, and sometimes I wake up walking toward the bathroom with the bathtub faucet running. I've started warning people, campers, fishermen, anyone I hear talking about visiting remote lakes in Wyoming. I tell them to be careful, to watch for strange signs. Most of them think I'm crazy, just another old guy who spent too much time alone in the woods. But some listen. A few even thank me later, saying they saw weird lights under the water or heard voices calling to them, and they remembered my warnings and got out fast. Because here's the thing nobody wants to hear. The creature in Bear Lake wasn't the only one. Last month, a fisherman disappeared at Jenny Lake. The week before that, a family camping at Jackson Lake reported seeing something huge moving under the water. Their kids had nightmares for weeks afterward, saying something was trying to talk to them in their sleep. The authorities blame accidents, drownings, wild animal attacks, anything except the truth. But I know better now. My grandmother's people were right. There are things in the deep water that hunger for human souls. Ancient things that have been sleeping in mountain lakes for thousands of years, and they're waking up. I keep Scout close these days. He's the only one who really understands what we went through together. Sometimes I catch him staring at me with those intelligent eyes, and I know he's thinking the same thing I am. We won the battle, but the war isn't over. Just last week, I got a call from a park ranger at Yellowstone Lake. 3 campers had gone missing, and there were reports of strange lights in the water. The ranger had heard about what happened to me at Bear Lake. Rumors travel fast in small communities. Would you be willing to come take a look? He asked. Maybe tell us what to watch for. I looked at Scout, who was lying by my feet. His ears perked up when he heard the word lake, and I could see the old fear and determination in his eyes. He was scared, but he was ready to fight again if he had to. Yeah, I told the ranger. We'll come take a look, because somebody has to warn people. Somebody has to stand guard against the things that live in dark water and whisper lies in the night. And maybe, if we're lucky, Scout and I can save a few more lives before these creatures figure out how to leave their lakes and come looking. Who for us on dry land? That's a thought that keeps me awake at night. But it also keeps me fighting. After all, we beat one monster already. How hard could the rest of them be? Etc. My name is Vincent Morales, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the desert. I need to tell someone before it's too late, before I forget the details or lose what's left of my mind. It was 1982, and I was living like a ghost in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. The sun was just coming up that morning, painting the rocky peaks red like blood. I'd been camping in this hidden canyon for almost 2 years, mining for gold where I wasn't supposed to be. The government said it was illegal, but I didn't care anymore. I needed that gold more than I needed to follow rules. My burro Pablo was acting strange that morning. Usually, he'd be calm and quiet, but his ears kept twitching like he was hearing sounds I couldn't hear. He kept looking up at the canyon walls with wide, scared eyes. Pablo had been with me for months, and I'd never seen him act like this before. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked him, scratching behind his ears, but he just snorted and moved closer to me, like he was trying to hide. The canyon was perfect for hiding. The walls went straight up about 200 feet on both sides, like giant stone. Walls protecting me from the outside world. I had water from a little spring, shade from the rocks, and most importantly, I was alone. No people, no questions, no reminders of the life I'd left behind. I used to be a border patrol agent. My partner Miguel and I worked together for 3 years, watching the desert, catching people trying to cross illegally. Miguel was my best friend, the only person who understood the loneliness of that job. We'd sit in our truck for hours, talking about our families, our dreams, making jokes to pass the time. Then one day, smugglers ambushed us. They came out of nowhere, guns blazing, and I watched Miguel die right next to me. I couldn't save him. I couldn't do anything but watch my best friend bleed out in the sand while I hid behind our truck like a coward. After that, I quit. I couldn't look at another Border Patrol uniform without seeing Miguel's face. I couldn't sleep without hearing his voice calling for help. The guilt ate at me like acid, so I ran. I took my savings, bought some mining equipment, and disappeared into these mountains where no one would find me. My Apache grandmother used to tell me stories about these mountains. She said they were cursed, that evil things lived here. She called them skinwalkers, creatures that could change their shape and steal your soul. But I was desperate, and desperate men don't listen to old stories. The nearest town was 50 miles away, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I had enough supplies to last months, and the gold I'd been finding would eventually buy me a new life, somewhere far away. Somewhere I could forget about Miguel, forget about my failures, forget about everything. But that morning felt different. Pablo's fear was real, and animals know things we don't. The desert was too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds singing, bugs buzzing, lizards scurrying around, but there was nothing. Just the sound of wind moving through the rocks, and even that sounded wrong somehow. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work. I had a good spot near the spring where the gold flakes were bigger and more frequent. Every day I'd chip away at the rock, pan the dirt, and slowly build up my little collection of gold dust. It wasn't much yet, but it was hope. It was a future that didn't include nightmares about Miguel. The temperature was already climbing, even though it was still early. Morning. By noon it would be over 115 degrees, hot enough to kill a man if he wasn't careful, but I knew how to survive in the desert. Vietnam taught me that. The Border Patrol taught me that, and losing everything taught me that survival was all that mattered. I kept Miguel's badge in my pocket, the metal warm against my leg. Sometimes I'd take it out and stare at it, remembering better times. But today I didn't want to think about the past. I just wanted to dig, to find enough gold to disappear forever. Pablo stayed close to me all morning, never wandering off like he usually did. He kept looking at the canyon walls, his nostrils flaring like he was smelling something dangerous. I followed his gaze but saw nothing except red rock and blue sky. Probably just a mountain lion, I told him. But even I didn't believe it. As the sun got higher, the shadows in the canyon grew shorter. The rocks began to shimmer with heat, and I could feel sweat starting to form under my hat. This was my world now. Heat, rocks, silence, and the constant search for gold that might never be enough. I didn't know then that something was already watching me. Something that had been waiting in these cursed mountains for a long time. Something that was hungry for more than gold. Something that knew about Miguel, about my guilt, about the pain I carried in my heart. But I was about to find out. The strange things started small, little things that I tried to explain away because I didn't want to believe what was happening. The first weird thing was my tools. I always put my pickaxe, shovel, and gold pan in the same spot every night before going to sleep, right next to my tent, lined up neat and tidy. But 3 mornings in a row, I woke up to find them moved. Not just moved a little, moved to completely different places. One morning, my pickaxe was stuck in the ground 50 feet away, like someone had thrown it there with incredible strength. Another morning, my gold pan was sitting on top of a boulder I couldn't even climb without a ladder. There was no way the wind could have done that. I told myself, maybe I was sleepwalking. Stress can make people do strange things, and I'd been under a lot of stress since Miguel died. But deep down, I knew I wasn't moving those tools. Pablo knew it too. He started refusing to go near certain parts of the canyon. There was one area, about 100 yards from our camp, where he would stop dead in his tracks. His whole body would shake, and he'd make these awful braying sounds, like he was terrified. No matter how much I pulled on his rope, he wouldn't go any closer. "Come on, Pablo," I'd say, trying to sound calm. "There's nothing there." But there was something there. I could feel it watching us. Then I found the footprints, human footprints, in the soft sand near the spring. That should have been impossible. Nobody knew where I was. The Border Patrol had given up looking for me months ago, assuming I died in the desert heat like so many others. I followed the prints, thinking maybe some hiker had gotten lost and wandered into my canyon. But as I tracked them, something impossible happened. The human footprints slowly changed into animal tracks, not gradually. I could see the exact spots where human feet became paw prints. The prints were getting bigger too, like whatever made them was growing as it walked. They looked like coyote tracks, but they were huge, much bigger than any coyote I'd ever seen. I stood there staring at those tracks for a long time, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The sun was hot on my back and sweat was dripping into my eyes, but I felt cold inside, really cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound made me jump. The desert is never completely quiet. There are always small animals moving around, insects chirping, wind blowing through the rocks. But now those normal sounds seemed threatening. Around midnight, I heard voices. Quiet whispers floating on the wind, speaking in a language I didn't understand. It sounded like Apache, the language my grandmother sometimes spoke when she was telling her old stories. But there was nobody else in the canyon. I was sure of that. I grabbed my flashlight and looked around, but the light just made the shadows seem darker and more frightening. The whispers continued for about 10 minutes, then stopped suddenly, like someone had turned off a radio. Pablo was pressed against the side of my tent, trembling. I'd never seen him so scared. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, but my voice was shaking too. The next day I found something that made my blood run cold. Rock cairns, small piles of stones stacked in careful patterns, had appeared overnight all around our camp. I counted 12 of them, arranged in a perfect circle. Each pile was exactly the same height, made from rocks that hadn't been there the day before. Someone or something had been working while I slept, just a few feet from my tent, and I hadn't heard a thing. I knocked down all the cairns, kicking the rocks away in anger and fear. But the next morning, they were back. Same positions, same height, like nothing had happened. That's when I started carrying my grandfather's silver cross. My grandmother had given it to me when I joined the Border Patrol, saying it would protect me from evil things. I'd kept it in my bag for years, never really believing in that kind of thing. But now, I wore it around my neck, under my shirt, and somehow it made me feel a little safer. The spring water started tasting different too. It had always been clean and sweet, the best water I'd ever tasted. But now it had a metallic flavor that made my stomach hurt. I had to force myself to drink it because it was the only water for miles, but every sip made me feel sick. My compass stopped working right. In certain parts of the canyon, the needle would spin wildly, unable to find north. I'd used that compass for years. In Vietnam, during my Border Patrol days, here in the desert, it had never failed me before, but the worst thing was the feeling of being watched. It started as just a tickle at the back of my neck, the way you feel when someone is staring at you from across a room. But it got stronger every day, until I could barely concentrate on my mining. I'd be digging, focused on the rock and dirt, when suddenly I'd get the overwhelming feeling that something was right behind me. I'd spin around, heart pounding, but there would be nothing there. Just empty, canyon and blue sky. Pablo felt it too. He stopped wandering away from camp completely. He'd stay close to me all day, pressing against my legs like a scared child. At night, he'd position himself between me and the darkness, ears constantly moving, listening for sounds I couldn't hear. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Isolation can make people paranoid. I'd seen it happen to other Border Patrol agents who spent too much time alone in the desert. The mind starts playing tricks, creating dangers that aren't really there. But on the fifth night, I saw it. I was lying in my tent, trying to sleep, when Pablo started making a low, growling sound I'd never heard from him before. I looked out, through the tent flap, and saw a coyote sitting on the rim of the canyon, silhouetted against the starry sky. That wasn't unusual. Coyotes lived in these mountains. But this one was different. It was sitting perfectly still, like a statue, staring down at our camp. And even from that distance, even in the darkness, I could see its eyes. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, calculating, human-like. They seemed to glow with their own light, and they were looking directly at me. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then the coyote stood up, and I swear it nodded at me before disappearing into the darkness. That's when I knew for certain that my grandmother's stories were real. Something unnatural was living in these mountains, and it had found me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent with my flashlight and my grandfather's silver cross, watching the canyon rim. And Pablo stayed pressed against me, both of us listening to every sound the desert made. The next morning, I was exhausted and jumpy. My hands shook as I made coffee, and I kept looking over my shoulder. I needed to focus on finding gold, but my mind kept going back to those glowing eyes. Maybe it was just a regular coyote, I told Pablo, as we walked to the mining spot. Maybe the moonlight made its eyes look weird. Pablo snorted like he didn't believe me. I didn't believe me either. I was digging near the spring when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy boots on gravel, the kind of sound a man makes when he's trying to be quiet but not quite quiet enough. I spun around, my heart hammering. There was a person standing about 30 feet away, near the rocks where I'd first seen the strange footprints. A man in a Border Patrol uniform, his back to me. "Hey!" I called out. "Hey! You can't be here! This is private land!" The man turned around slowly, and my world stopped. It was Miguel, my dead partner Miguel, looking exactly like he had 3 years ago. Same mustache, same kind eyes, same way of standing with his hands on his belt. He was even wearing the same uniform he'd died in, though now it looked clean and pressed instead of bloody. "Hey, Vince," he said, and his voice was exactly right. "I've been looking for you. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. This was impossible. I'd watched Miguel die. I'd been to his funeral. I'd cried over his grave." "You're not real," I whispered. Miguel smiled, the same gentle smile he used to give me when I was stressed about work. "I'm as real as I ever was, partner. I came to talk to you." He started walking toward me, and I noticed he wasn't making footprints in the sand. His boots should have left marks, but the ground looked untouched where he walked. "Stay back," I said, pulling out my grandfather's cross. "Stay away from me." Miguel stopped and his smile faded. "Why are you afraid of me, Vince? I'm your friend. I'm your partner." "My partner is dead. I watched him die." "You watched me die because you didn't help me," Miguel said, and now his voice sounded different, colder. "You hid behind the truck, like a coward while I bled out in the sand." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach because they were true. I had hidden. I had been too scared to help him. "You think finding gold will make you feel better," Miguel continued. "You think running away will fix what you did." "I couldn't save you," I said, tears starting to run down my face. "The smugglers had too many guns. I would have died too." "Maybe you should have died too," Miguel said. "Maybe that would have been better." Pablo suddenly charged at the fake Miguel, braying loudly and kicking with his hind legs. But instead of hitting a person, his hooves went right through empty air, like Miguel was made of smoke. That's when Miguel started changing. His face got longer and thinner. His skin turned grey like ash. His eyes became yellow and started glowing with that same unnatural light I'd seen on the canyon rim. His fingers grew into claws, and his teeth became sharp and pointed. But the worst part was that he kept talking in Miguel's voice, even as his body twisted into something horrible. "I know everything about you, Vince," the thing said. "I know about your nightmares. I know about the guilt that eats at you every day. I know how much you want to die." Then it changed again, becoming a huge owl with wings that spread wider than my arms. The owl's eyes were still yellow and glowing, still watching me with that terrible intelligence. "I can be anything," it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "I can be anyone you've ever lost." The owl became a black bear, massive and powerful, with the same glowing eyes. Then it became a man again, but not Miguel this time. This was something else entirely, tall and thin like a skeleton, covered in ash and wearing necklaces made of bones. "Do you know what I am?" it asked. I could barely whisper the word my grandmother had taught me. "Skinwalker." "Very good," it said, clapping its hands together. The sound echoed off the canyon walls like gunshots. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. She knew about my kind." Pablo was going crazy, running in circles and making sounds I'd never heard from him before. The skinwalker looked at him and laughed. "Animals always know," it said. "They can smell the death on me." "What do you want?" I asked. "I want what I've always wanted," the skinwalker said. "I want to hunt. I want to feed. And you, Vincent Morales, are going to help me." It reached out one long, thin hand toward me, and I saw that its fingernails were more like claws, black and sharp and crusted with old blood. "I've been trapped in these mountains for a long time," it said. "Decades. The Apache used to know how to keep my kind away, but they're gone now. It's just me and the desert and the occasional lost soul who wanders into my territory." "Like me," I said. "Like you. But you're special, Vincent. You're full of guilt and pain and self-hatred. Those emotions make you taste better. They make you stronger when I take your body." "Take my body?" The skinwalker smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "That's what we do. We steal the skin of our victims and wear it like clothing. Then we go out into the world and hunt in their place." I thought about all the times I'd felt like someone was watching me, all the strange occurrences around the camp. The skinwalker had been studying me, learning my habits, figuring out how to become me. "I already know everything about your life," it said, proving my thoughts correct. "I know about your time in Vietnam, your years with the Border Patrol, your family back in Phoenix. When I take your skin, I'll become you perfectly. No one will ever know the difference." Pablo suddenly charged again, but this time the skinwalker was ready. It reached out one hand and touched my burro's forehead, and Pablo dropped dead instantly, just like that. 1 second he was alive and fighting. The next, he was lying still in the sand. I screamed and ran to Pablo, dropping to my knees beside him. His eyes were still open, but they were empty now. Whatever the skinwalker had done, it had sucked the life right out of him. "I'm sorry you had to see that," the skinwalker said. And it actually sounded sorry. But he was going to be a problem. Animals can sense what I am, and they never stop fighting. I held Pablo's head in my lap, crying like a baby. He'd been my only friend for months, my only companion in this lonely place. And now he was gone because of me, because I'd brought this evil thing into his world. "Don't be sad," the skinwalker said. "Soon you'll be with him. And I'll be you, living your life, wearing your face." I looked up at the creature and I saw something in its glowing eyes that scared me more than anything else. Hunger. This thing was hungry for more than just my body. It was hungry for my memories, my relationships, my entire existence, and I realized that killing me was just the beginning of what it planned to do. After Pablo died, something broke inside me. I sat there holding his head for a long time, not caring that the skinwalker was watching me. My only friend was gone, and it was my fault for coming to this cursed place. "Get up," the skinwalker said finally. "We have things to discuss." I looked up at it through my tears. "Just kill me and get it over with." "Oh no," it said, shaking its head. "Death is just the end. The real fun comes before that." That's when the voices started. At first it was just Miguel's voice calling my name from different parts of the canyon. I'd hear him shouting, "Vince, help me!" and I'd run toward the sound, thinking maybe somehow he was really there. But I'd find nothing, except empty rocks and shadows. Then other voices joined in. My father, who died when I was 12. My army sergeant from Vietnam. Other border patrol agents I'd worked with over the years. All of them calling to me, asking why I hadn't saved them, why I'd let them down. "I didn't let you down, Dad," I said to the empty canyon. "You had a heart attack. I was just a kid." But my father's voice came back, sounding disappointed and sad. "You could have called the ambulance faster, son. You could have tried harder." The voices followed me everywhere. When I tried to sleep, they whispered in my ear. When I tried to eat, they told me I didn't deserve food. When I tried to work on my mining, they reminded me of every mistake I'd ever made. The skinwalker would appear in different forms throughout the day, sometimes as people I knew, sometimes as animals, sometimes as that horrible skeletal thing, covered in ash and bones. But no matter what shape it took, it was always watching me, always studying me. "You're losing your mind," it said one afternoon, appearing as my grandmother. "I can see it happening. Your thoughts are getting all mixed up." It was right. I was having trouble remembering things. Sometimes I'd forget what I was doing in the middle of doing it. I'd find myself standing in places with no memory of how I got there. The heat and the stress and the lack of sleep were making everything fuzzy. "That's good," the skinwalker said. "When your mind breaks completely, it'll be easier for me to take over." I tried to leave the canyon several times, but I kept getting lost. Paths that I knew led out would somehow turn back on themselves. Rocks that I used as landmarks would be in different places. The canyon itself seemed to be changing, like the skinwalker was controlling it somehow. "You can't leave," it explained, sitting on a boulder in the form of a coyote. "This is my home, and I control everything here, the rocks, the paths, even the way the shadows fall." I'd walk for hours, thinking I was heading toward the canyon mouth, only to find myself back at my camp. It was like being trapped in a maze that kept changing its walls. The worst part was the dreams. When I finally managed to fall asleep, the skinwalker would be there waiting for me. It would show me things, horrible things I don't want to describe. It would make me relive Miguel's death over and over, but each time it was worse. Each time I was more of a coward. "This is what really happened," it would whisper in my ear as I watched Dream Miguel die again. "You didn't hide because you were scared. You hid because you wanted him to die. You were jealous of him." "That's not true," I'd say, but part of me wondered if it was. "You wanted his wife to notice you," the skinwalker continued. "You wanted his kids to like you better, so you let him die." Even when I was awake, the dreams felt real. I started to doubt my own memories. Maybe I had been jealous of Miguel. Maybe I could have saved him if I'd really tried. The skinwalker fed on these doubts, growing stronger as I grew weaker. One day I found drawings on the canyon walls that hadn't been there before. Old drawings, like the ones Native Americans used to make. But these weren't normal pictures of animals and hunting. These showed stick figures being chased by something with glowing eyes. They showed people changing into animals. They showed death and fear and horrible things happening. "My people drew those," the skinwalker said, appearing beside me as an old Apache man. "Long ago, before your kind came to this land, they tried to warn others about creatures like me." I studied the drawings more carefully. In one picture, a Group of people were pushing something into a cave and rolling a big rock in front of it. In another, they were dancing around a fire while something with yellow eyes watched from the darkness. They trapped you here, I realized. For a while, the Skinwalker said, but magic fades over time. The ceremonies are forgotten. The young, people don't believe the old stories, and eventually things like me find ways to break free. How long have you been here? Long enough to get very, very hungry. The pictures showed me something else too. In the last drawing, the thing with yellow eyes was wearing human skin like clothing, walking among people who didn't know what it really was. That's my plan for you, the Skinwalker said, reading my thoughts. I'll wear your skin and go to Phoenix. I'll visit your sister, your nephew, all the people who knew Vincent Morales. They'll think I'm you, just changed by grief and time in the desert. The idea of this thing pretending to be me, fooling my family, made me sick to my stomach. And then what? I asked. Then I hunt, it said simply. I feed, and when people start to disappear, they'll blame you. Vincent Morales will become a serial killer, a madman who snapped after his partner's death. I understood now why it was taking so long to kill me. The Skinwalker wasn't just stealing my body, it was stealing my entire life, my identity, my relationships with everyone I cared about. It would use my face to do terrible things, and everyone would think I had done them. You're a monster, I said. I'm a survivor, it replied. Just like you. The only difference is that I'm better at it. That night I made a decision, and I couldn't escape the canyon, and I couldn't fight this thing directly. But maybe I could find another way. Maybe I could use the one advantage I had. I knew these mountains, and I knew something about explosives from my army days. If I couldn't save myself, maybe I could at least stop the Skinwalker from hurting anyone else. But first, I had to survive long enough to put my plan into action, and the Skinwalker was getting impatient. I could see it in those yellow eyes, in the way it watched me like a cat watching a mouse. Time was running out. I had one chance and I knew it. The Skinwalker was getting tired of playing with me. I could see it in the way it looked at me. Now, like a person who's finished with their food and is ready to clear the table. In my old Border Patrol gear, I still had some things from my army days that I'd never thrown away. 3 small charges of C4 explosive, the kind we used to clear roadblocks in Vietnam. I'd kept them all these years, telling myself they might be useful someday. Today was that day. The Skinwalker was getting careless too. It spent less time watching me and more time talking, telling me stories about all the people it had killed over the years. It was proud of what it had done, like an artist showing off paintings. There was a family in 1963, it said, sitting by my dead campfire, in the form of a young girl, a mother, father, and 2 children. They were camping near here, just like you. I took the father's skin first, then used his face to convince the others to come deeper into the canyon. I pretended to listen while I slowly moved my hands toward my backpack where the explosives were hidden. The children trusted me because I looked like their daddy, it continued, right up until the end. You're sick, I said, trying to keep it talking. I'm hungry, it corrected, and I'm very, very good at what I do. My fingers found the first charge. The C4 was still good. Military explosives don't go bad for decades if you store them right. I had learned how to use them in the army. How to set timers, how to make things go boom when and where you wanted them to. What are you thinking about, Vincent? The Skinwalker asked, suddenly suspicious. Its yellow eyes were staring right at me. Nothing, I said quickly, just listening to your story. But it was already changing, growing larger, becoming that horrible skeletal thing covered in ash and bones. You're planning something. I can smell it on you. I pulled out my grandfather's silver cross and held it up. The Skinwalker hissed and stepped back, smoke rising from its skin where the cross's light touched it. That won't save you, it snarled. It will only delay me. Maybe, I said, backing toward the old mine shaft I'd been digging for 2 years. "But it'll hurt you enough." The skinwalker lunged at me, its claws reaching for my throat. I swung the cross at its face, and where the silver touched its skin, the flesh burned and bubbled like acid. It screamed and jumped back, holding its damaged cheek. "You little worm," it shouted, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I'll make your death last for days." I ran for the mine shaft, the skinwalker right behind me. I could hear its claws, scraping against the rocks as it chased me, could feel its hot breath on my neck. But I made it to the entrance just ahead of it. The mine shaft went back about 50 feet into the mountain. I dug it following a vein of gold, making it just wide enough for me and Pablo to work in. The roof was supported by old wooden beams. I'd put up myself, and I knew exactly which beam was the most important one. "There's nowhere to run now," the skinwalker said, following me into the tunnel. Its eyes glowed in the darkness like 2 yellow lamps. "This is just a hole in the ground." "Yeah," I said, pulling out the first charge of C4. "My hole." I slapped the explosive against the main support beam and set the timer for 30 seconds. The skinwalker saw what I was doing and tried to rush me, but I held up the silver cross again, keeping it back. "You're going to kill us both," it said, and for the first time it sounded scared. "That's the idea," I said, setting the second charge. Against another beam, the skinwalker tried a different approach. It changed back into Miguel, my dead partner, looking exactly like he had in life. "Vince, don't do this," Miguel's voice said. "We can work something out. We can be partners again, like the old days." "You're not Miguel," I said, placing the third charge. "Miguel was a good man. You're just a thing that wears people's faces." "But I have all his memories," the fake Miguel said. "I remember our first day together, when you were so nervous you spilled coffee on your uniform. I remember the time we helped that lost kid find his parents. I remember everything Miguel ever knew about you." For a second, I almost believed it. The voice was so perfect, so real, but then I remembered Pablo, lying dead in the sand because this thing had touched him. I remembered all the people it had killed over the years, all the families it had destroyed. "Memories don't make you human," I said, "and wearing someone's skin doesn't make you them." The timer on the first charge showed 10 seconds left. The skinwalker realized I was serious and tried to rush past me toward the mine entrance, but I tackled it, holding on tight. Its claws raked across my back, tearing my shirt and cutting deep into my skin, but I didn't let go. "If I can't stop you," I said through gritted teeth, "at least I can trap you." 5 seconds. The skinwalker was screaming now, making sounds no human throat could make. It was changing rapidly. Miguel to coyote, to owl, to that horrible skeletal thing and back again, like it couldn't decide what form to die in. 3 seconds. I let go and ran for a crack in the mine wall that I'd noticed weeks ago. It was barely wide enough for a person, but I'd always wondered where it led. 2 seconds. I squeezed into the crack just as the explosives went off. The sound was like the world ending. Tons of rock came crashing down, filling the mine shaft completely. The mountain shook and dust filled my lungs so thick I couldn't breathe. I felt the skinwalker's claws grab my leg just as the rocks buried it, but then the grip was gone. I crawled through the crack for what felt like hours, following a narrow passage that led up and out of the mountain. When I finally emerged, I was on the other side of the canyon, far from my old camp. The sun was setting, painting the rocks red again, just like that first morning when all this started. I looked back at where the mine had been. The entrance was completely sealed under thousands of tons of rock. Nothing could get out of there. Nothing could survive that. But I had survived barely. My back was bleeding from the skinwalker's claws, and I was weak from days, without proper food or sleep. I had no water, no supplies, no way to get home except to walk. I stumbled through the desert for 3 days before a park ranger found me. I was delirious from heat and dehydration, babbling about monsters and dead partners and things that wore people's faces. They took me to a hospital, then to another kind of hospital. The kind with padded walls and doctors who ask a lot of questions. Nobody believed my story. How could they? A shape-shifting monster that steals people's identities. It sounded crazy even to me sometimes. The doctors said I'd had a complete mental breakdown from grief and isolation. They said I'd probably hallucinated everything after. Pablo died from a snake bite or heat stroke, but I know what really happened. I know what I saw, what I fought, what I buried under all that rock. They kept me in the psychiatric hospital for 2 years. I drew pictures of the skinwalker, wrote down everything I could remember about it, tried to warn anyone who would listen. But the doctors just saw it as proof of my illness. Eventually, they let me out. I'm old now, living in a small apartment in Phoenix. I take medication that makes everything feel fuzzy and distant. The doctors say it helps with my delusions. But sometimes late at night, I hear scratching sounds from under the ground, like something trying to dig its way out. And sometimes, when I'm walking down the street, I see someone with eyes that look a little too bright, a little too knowing. Someone who smiles at me like they know a secret. The mine is still sealed. I checked a few years ago, driving out to the Superstition Mountains, even though it scared me. The rocks haven't moved. The entrance is still buried, but I wonder sometimes if I really killed it or if I just made it angry. I wonder if something that old, that evil, can really be destroyed by rocks and explosives. I guess I'll find out eventually. Until then, I keep my grandfather's silver cross close, and I try not to think about yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. But I wanted you to know the truth, in case something happens to me. In case one day you hear about Vincent Morales doing terrible things, hurting people, being someone he's not. That won't be me. That'll be the thing from Devil's Canyon, wearing my face.